Welcome to Balancing the Masculine and Feminine, Navigating Gender Roles and Expectations, an audiobook by Mindful Literary. In today's world, the dynamics of masculinity and femininity are evolving rapidly. As societal expectations shift and our understanding of gender deepens, it becomes increasingly important to explore and embrace the complexities of these roles. This audiobook aims to guide you through the intricate landscape of gender, offering insights into the traditional and modern perspectives of masculinity and femininity. We begin by delving into the foundations of gender roles, examining how they have been shaped by societal norms and media representations. From there, we explore the impact of these roles on our personal and professional lives, our relationships, and our mental health. Throughout this journey, we will discuss the significance of self-identity, the power of intersectionality, and the influence of social media on our perceptions of gender. With practical advice and thought-provoking discussions, this audiobook encourages you to embrace a balanced perspective on gender. By understanding and integrating both masculine and feminine energies, you can navigate gender roles and expectations with confidence and authenticity. Join us as we embark on this enlightening journey, aiming to create a more inclusive and understanding world where everyone can thrive. Welcome to Balancing the Masculine and Feminine, Navigating Gender Roles and Expectations. Chapter 1. Introduction to Masculine and Feminine Dynamics. Societal Expectations of Masculinity and Femininity. Growing up, I always felt the weight of invisible eyes watching, judging whether I was adhering to the script society had written for me. It was as if, even as children, we were handed roles in a play where the ending had already been decided. For boys, the script emphasized strength, stoicism, and an unassailable toughness. Girls, meanwhile, were cast as nurturing, gentle, and capable of graceful endurance under pressure. In our household, these roles were unintentionally reinforced every day. My father, a man of few words and many responsibilities, rarely showed vulnerability. Crying wasn't forbidden, but it might as well have been the way he stiffened whenever emotions threatened to surge. My mother, on the other hand, was the emotional glue that held everything together, her softness belying an inner resilience that went unacknowledged except in hushed gratitude. School was where these expectations crystallized further. In gym class, boys were pushed to break their bodies in the name of competitiveness and physical dominance. Girls were often encouraged to excel in academics, but not at the expense of becoming overly opinionated or assertive, lest they be labeled bossy or unfeminine. These experiences accumulated like sediment, forming layers of an identity often built on compliance rather than choice. And then there was the omnipresent influence of media. Television shows, movies, advertisements, they all painted pictures of ideal men and women. Heroes who saved the world without shedding a tear, heroines who managed to be strong yet vulnerably beautiful. As a child, my heroes from cartoons and comic books were modeled after these unflinchingly brave archetypes. But it didn't end with childhood. Social media, a constant companion in our lives today, has its own way of amplifying these expectations. Instagram feeds filled with influencers perpetuating the ideal body types, behaviors, and lifestyles for men and women. Men sporting rugged physiques or flaunting their wealth, women meticulously curated in pictures, presenting a facade of effortless beauty and poise. I remember vividly a post I saw last year, a friend's meticulously edited photo highlighting a perfect domestic scene, complete with her poised grace and her husband's stern but seemingly compassionate demeanor. The comments were filled with admiration, reinforcing an ideal that was likely as curated as the image itself. The reality is that these societal norms, seared into our consciousness from early on, stick with us and shape our behaviors well into adulthood. Every time a man holds back tears because he fears it would make him appear weak or a woman feels compelled to smile through her discomfort to avoid being labeled difficult, these invisible scripts are at play. As I reflect on my own journey, it's clear that these expectations, although ostensibly benign, can create a prison of sorts. They dictate not merely actions but emotions, not merely appearances but internal narratives. How does one break free from the invisible chain society drapes so effortlessly around us? Is it even possible to rewrite your part when everyone around you seems content following the script? And if the script is flawed, if it fails to account for the richness of human experience and the full spectrum of emotional expression, what then? Surely, the answers must lie somewhere beyond the neatly drawn lines and well-trodden paths. The tension between expectation and reality gnaws at me, an unresolved question demanding exploration. Even as I navigate, the stage still lights up, governed by a script that's begging for a rewrite. The impact of social media on gender norms. I remember the first time I opened Instagram and was bombarded with images of chiseled abs and flawless makeup. It felt like entering a parallel universe where everyone had a picture-perfect life, embodying the ideal forms of masculinity and femininity. That was years ago, and since then, my relationship with social media has evolved, much like the platforms themselves. They have become arenas where gender norms are not just displayed but dissected, challenged, and occasionally, reinforced to a suffocating degree. As I scroll through my feed, I come across an influencer debunking the myth of the perfect body. She talks openly about her struggles with body image and the unrealistic standards imposed by the beauty industry. It's empowering and refreshing to see someone peel back the filters, showing the raw, unedited aspects of themselves. But just a few swipes later, I'm confronted with ads and posts touting diet pills and gym routines that promise to sculpt you into society's idea of perfection. It's a dizzying back and forth between empowerment and toxic idealization. TikTok, with its quick, engaging videos, offers a different perspective. Here, young men effortlessly dance while wearing skirts, proudly painting their nails, and defying traditional notions of masculinity. But for every post celebrating these acts of rebellion, there are comments riddled with hate and ignorance, trying to pull them back into rigid gender boxes. These conflicting signals show that while progress is made, it is not without resistance. Twitter presents another layer to this intricate tapestry. It's where these conversations about gender norms often start or gain momentum. Hashtags advocating for gender neutrality and acceptance trend frequently, propelling real societal change. Yet, just as quickly, counter-hashtags emerge, dragging the discourse into contentious territory. It's both hopeful and disheartening to see how polarized opinions can be, sometimes turning what could be a progressive dialogue into a battlefield. Platforms like these have the power to shape our perceptions, often in ways we don't immediately recognize. Even those of us who are aware of these dynamics are not entirely immune. We find ourselves double-checking our reflections, wondering if we measure up, or second-guessing our expressions of gender, seeking validation from strangers online. In this constant noise, finding and maintaining our authentic selves becomes more challenging. Yet, there is a silver lining. The positive representation that does break through can be transformative. Seeing people like us, or people who courageously exist beyond the binary, gives us permission to explore and embrace our true selves. The influencers who are transparent about their flaws, the TikTokers who celebrate fluidity, the Twitter activists who ignite change, they remind us that there is beauty in diversity and strength in vulnerability. Reflecting back, I see how these platforms serve as both mirrors and magnifiers, reflecting the progress we've made and magnifying the work yet to be done. The question remains, how do we navigate this complex digital landscape without losing sight of our authentic selves? It's a journey we must all undertake, men and women alike, to redefine the norms that have long dictated our lives. And as the battle between representation and stereotype continues, perhaps the first step is consciously curating what we consume, amplifying voices that uplift rather than uphold the status quo. The impact of social media on gender norms is undeniable. It's a double-edged sword, capable of both cutting down barriers and perpetuating harmful ideals. In recognizing this, we hold the power to turn the tide, one post, like, and share at a time. The revolution may well be digital, but its effects resonate deeply in our offline lives. Chapter 2: Exploring Traditional Gender Roles. Masculine Traits and Expectations. From an early age, I felt the societal weight of what it meant to be a man. As a boy, playground lessons were stark and simple. Strength was venerated, tears were mocked. My father's stern but loving hand reinforced these ideals. "Boys don't cry," he would say, his eyes betraying any chance of contradiction. It was a message echoed by my peers, teachers, and even the media. TV shows depicted men as stoic heroes, resilient against the harshest trials. Superheroes and action stars became the epitome of manhood, emboldening us to emulate that seemingly unassailable fortitude. This expectation for strength wasn't merely physical, but psychological, too. Emotions were to be managed privately. Vulnerability was a weakness. While my sisters were allowed the luxury of emotional expression, I learned to swallow my fears and anxieties. Even now, the notion of opening up feels foreign, almost traitorous to the image I was meticulously crafted into. Friends and colleagues, also sculpted by the same chisel of societal expectation, rarely veer from the script. Together, we maintain this facade, marred by the occasional crack that is quickly and quietly patched up. But perhaps the most challenging trait to navigate is the demand for dominance. There's an unspoken hierarchy, an invisible ladder that all men seem to innately understand. Success often hinges on one's ability to appear invulnerable and in control, whether in boardrooms or on social media feeds. Instagram and Facebook profiles, meticulously curated to showcase triumphs, never defeats. Every post, every tweet a declaration of superiority, reinforcing the silent battle for dominance. The influence of social media cannot be understated. It has become both an arena and a mirror, amplifying and reflecting societal norms. Men post gym selfies to exhibit physical prowess, share motivational quotes to underscore mental fortitude, and boast career milestones to assert their dominance. Each like, comment, and share acts as validation, a digital applause reinforcing our adherence to these age-old norms. However, in quieter, solitary moments, when the screen's glow dims, an unsettling question emerges. What if these traits we've held so dear are nothing more than chains disguised as virtues? As I ponder this, the room seems to close in, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truth. The tension is palpable, a silent crescendo that leaves me questioning not just societal norms, but my very identity. The resolution feels both elusive and inevitable, a journey that will demand every ounce of the so-called strength I've been taught to cherish. Feminine traits and expectations. It started with my grandmother's stories, woven tightly into my childhood memories. She would sit in her favorite rocking chair, her voice as soothing as a summer breeze, recounting tales of how a woman's strength lies in her nurturing soul. I remember her soft, wrinkled hands clasped over mine, the tender grip enforcing the idea that to nurture was a woman's gift and, ultimately, her duty. Those stories painted an ideal I would come to grapple with in ways I never anticipated. Growing up, I saw these same characteristics celebrated in my mother. She was the epitome of empathy, always ready to lend an ear or shoulder to anyone in distress. It was as if her empathy was an unending well, from which she continually drew to quench the fires of other people's sorrows. And it wasn't just the women in my family. Media and society at large cast the same mold. From movies to advertisements, the message was clear and repetitive. Femininity was synonymous with emotional expressiveness, and deviation from this norm was seldom glorified. I began to notice how these narratives permeated my interactions with others. Friends would seek my advice on matters of the heart, expecting a gentle touch and a well of patience. Even in professional settings, there was an unspoken expectation for me to assume roles that involved caretaking or emotional labor, and whenever I did, it seemed to validate the societal cues that celebrated sensitivity and empathy in women. But what weighed heavily was how these traits were portrayed as givens, not choices. I lived in a world where emotional expression was lauded, yet there lingered an undertow suggesting that expressing too much could render a woman hysterical or weak. It was a dance of contradictions, where stepping out of line sometimes meant harsh judgment rather than understanding. Social media intensified these expectations. Platforms were flooded with aesthetic portrayals of the perfect woman, always poised, forever empathetic, and endlessly nurturing. The hashtags and filters may have changed, but the core message did not. Every like, ear, and comment reinforced a specific archetype, pressing down on my shoulders with an invisible weight. It became clear that men, too, were exposed to these expectations. Some friends and colleagues confessed that they felt drawn to women who exhibited these traits, often unconsciously perpetuating the same stereotypes. Their admissions, though innocent in intent, were a mirror reflecting the far-reaching influence of these cultural ideals. As I wove through these realizations, an internal conflict brewed. The tension between authenticity and societal expectations gnawed at me. How could one possess, or reject, these traits without feeling inadequate? And more pressing, how did we dismantle such deeply entrenched narratives? The evolution of gender roles. Reflecting on my grandmother's life, I couldn't help but marvel at how dramatically the world has changed. She lived during a time when her primary expectation was to be a devoted housewife and mother. The limitations imposed on her, and on countless women of her generation, were frustratingly immense. Women had to fight for the right to vote, and higher education was often reserved for men. My grandmother, despite her keen intelligence and unyielding spirit, had to wade through a society that largely viewed her gender as secondary. Fast forward through the years, waves of feminism began to roar. The first wave, focusing on legal issues like suffrage, led to the second wave, which tackled a broader range of inequalities, from reproductive rights to workplace discrimination. I remember my mother passionately reading Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. The battle cry of the era was choice and autonomy. My mother told me stories of women chaining themselves to job opportunities and forcing open doors that had been long sealed. By the time I entered the picture, social norms were still shifting. I grew up in the 90s, a time of grunge music and burgeoning internet, a time when gender roles were being interrogated in public and private conversations. The media, through shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The X-Files, presented strong female leads who broke the dams of traditional gender expectations. But even then, societal pressure still whispered outdated notions into our ears. Dress a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain kind of woman, or mange. The turn of the millennium brought with it unprecedented social change. The rise of social media became a double-edged sword in the quest for gender equality. On one hand, platforms like Twitter and Instagram served as megaphones for feminist movements and LGBTQ+ advocacy. On the other hand, they also became a battleground rife with trolls and detractors. Yet, voices that were once marginalized found a way to seep into the mainstream, demanding to be heard. I remember witnessing the power of movements like #MeToo, which exposed the raw and unfiltered experiences of countless individuals across various industries. It was a momentous tipping point where the whispers of the oppressed reverberated across the globe, shaking even the most fortified structures of power. Concurrently, the LGBTQ+ community began to achieve long-awaited recognition. The fight for marriage equality, culminating in the landmark decision by the Supreme Court in 2015, was a testament to how far we had come. Gender identity and expression became topics of mainstream discourse. New generations, unshackled by the binary perceptions of their forebears, began to embrace a spectrum of identities. Social media campaigns educated and empowered, while also creating a sense of community for those who felt isolated by their difference. As a man, I found myself grappling with these massive shifts. It wasn't merely about adapting, but fully understanding the nuances. I had to unlearn years of subconscious biases, realizing that equality wasn't a zero-sum game. Men didn't lose rights in the pursuit of women gaining theirs, nor did traditional masculinity need to crumble for the acknowledgement of diverse gender expressions. It's a continuous process of evolution and empathy. The landscape of gender roles is far from settled, though we've covered remarkable ground. Now, more than ever, it's crucial to reflect on where we've been and where we're heading. As I looked into the eyes of my own children, I wished for them a world where gender was a spectrum celebrated rather than a box confined. The path to such a future lies in our collective hands. Chapter 3: Impact of Society on Gender. How society shapes gender dynamics. When I look back on my childhood, it astonishes me how naturally we absorbed the lessons society laid out for us about gender. It began innocently enough: a pink dress for me, a blue truck for my brother. Even before we could articulate our own desires, the world was quietly molding us, impressing upon our young minds what it meant to be him or her. As children, we didn't question it. The simplicity of these norms gave us a tidy framework to understand our places in the world. The insidious power of societal norms only becomes clear as you age, like the slowly tightening grip of a vice. In school, boys were expected to be boisterous and assertive, girls to be demure and accommodating. Teachers, often unconsciously, encouraged this dichotomy, praising boys for their boldness and girls for their politeness. And so, the pattern continued, each stage of life bringing with it a new set of expectations, subtly woven into the fabric of our daily interactions. I remember the first time I felt the weight of these conventions clash with my true self. It was during a high school debate competition. I had always been outspoken, eager to share my thoughts, but on that day, a judge, a respected figure in our small town, commented not on my arguments but on my unladylike aggressiveness. It was a moment of crystallization, a sharp realization of how society polices the boundaries of gender expression. These experiences aren't limited to childhood or adolescence. In the workplace, I noticed how men and women navigated their careers differently. Men were often encouraged to take risks, assert themselves, and aspire to leadership. Women, on the other hand, were told, subtly and overtly, to be team players, to avoid making waves. These expectations affected our career trajectories, shaping who got promoted, who got sidelined. Then, there's the omnipresent force of social media. Here, societal norms are amplified, magnified through likes, shares, and follows. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, social media can challenge the status quo by providing platforms for marginalized voices. On the other, it can reinforce harmful stereotypes at an unprecedented scale. I've seen friends drown in the pressure to conform to an idealized image, their sense of self-worth tethered to the fluctuating tides of public approval. One poignant example comes to mind: a close friend who transformed her Instagram into a meticulously curated gallery of perfection, each post an ode to societal expectations of beauty and femininity. The cracks only began to show in private conversations, where the pressure to maintain this facade took a palpable toll on her mental health. Social media had become both her stage and her cage. It becomes clear that while societal norms play a foundational role in shaping gender dynamics, they do not act alone. Institutions, schools, workplaces, media, are complicit, each reinforcing the expectations of the other. My own story, filled with minor rebellions and compliance alike, is a testament to the pervasive influence of these intertwined forces. The pressure to conform to gender stereotypes. The moment I first stepped into high school, I felt the weight of expectations pressing down on me. It wasn't just the academic expectations, though those were certainly present and accounted for. No, It was something far more pervasive, the looming shadow of gender stereotypes. As a young woman, I was expected to be nurturing, emotionally intelligent, yet somehow still demure and reserved. My male peers had their own set of standards to meet: stoicism, assertiveness, and an almost allergic reaction to anything remotely emotionally expressive. Every day, the invisible script society handed us dictated our actions, our appearances, the very words that came out of our mouths. I remember the conflicting advice: "Je speak up, be confident," followed almost immediately by, "Je don't be too aggressive, no one likes a loudmouth." Meanwhile, the boys in my class were encouraged to dominate conversations, their assertiveness praised as a sign of future leadership potential. The dichotomy was maddening. Then there was social media, a magnifying glass on these societal norms, emphasizing and, worse yet, romanticizing them. My feed was flooded with influencers crafting perfect, gender-conforming lives. Women displaying their beauty routines, their perfectly curated homes. Men flaunting their achievements, their hardened, masculine lifestyles. Each post, each like, each comment felt like a reminder of the mold I was supposed to fit into, but couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't. The external pressure was incessant, but the internal conflict was even more harrowing. Every time I pushed against these gender norms, a voice inside reminded me of the cost. There were opportunities one missed because I didn't want to come off as too aggressive. Friends drifted away because I wasn't conforming to the girly activities that bonded us. On the flip side, when I did acquiesce, the unease was palpable, as though I was betraying an integral part of myself for the sake of societal acceptance. As the years went by, these pressures evolved but never disappeared. In college, the stakes were higher. It wasn't just about fitting in anymore, it was about shaping my future. The irony was that the more I tried to carve out an identity true to myself, the more friction I encountered. The classroom, the social circles, the professional settings, all these became battlegrounds where gender stereotypes dictated the rules of engagement. But I wasn't alone in this struggle. Many of my friends, both men and women, shared stories that echoed my own. The fear of stepping out of the prescribed gender roles loomed large, manifesting in late-night conversations and shared anxieties. The psychological toll was immense. There were times I found myself questioning my value, my identity, the very essence of who I was and who I wanted to be. As I stand at the cusp of adulthood, these pressures have not faded, but my resolve has only strengthened. The journey is ongoing, fraught with challenges, yet also filled with moments of triumph and self-discovery. The real battle is not just against societal expectations, but against the internal voices that have been conditioned to uphold them. The path is arduous, and the destination uncertain, but one thing is clear: resisting these stereotypes isn't just an act of rebellion, it's an essential part of becoming who I am meant to be. The road ahead is long, but with each step, I grow more resilient, more determined to break free from the shackles of gender conformity. And in that struggle, in that resistance, I find my strength. Overcoming gender expectations. I remember the first time I felt boxed in by gender expectations. It was a crisp fall afternoon, and I was 8 years old. My friends and I had gathered for our usual Saturday game of soccer at the local park. I loved soccer, the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of sprinting across the field. But that day, something changed. One of the guys, Tommy, turned to me and said, "You shouldn't be playing soccer. That's a boy's game." That comment, though small, planted a seed of doubt in my young mind. I started noticing the subtle cues around me, the unspoken rules of what boys and girls were supposed to do. Boys played with trucks and action figures, while girls played with dolls and hosted tea parties. Boys were expected to be tough and unemotional, while girls were encouraged to be nurturing and gentle. It was confusing, to say the least, and I began to question my place in the world. Fast forward to my teenage years, and the pressure only intensified. Society's expectations were reinforced through every medium: TV shows, movies, advertisements, and yes, social media. Instagram and Facebook became daily reminders of what I should aspire to be: a poised, attractive woman who exuded confidence. I spent hours scrolling through feeds, comparing myself to an impossible standard. It was overwhelming and, frankly, exhausting. But one day, during a particularly rough week in high school, I stumbled upon a blog post by a woman who had faced similar struggles. She wrote about her journey of self-acceptance, the challenges she overcame, and how she had finally embraced her true self. Her words struck a chord with me. Inspired by her courage, I decided it was time for a change. I needed to redefine what being a woman meant to me, beyond the constraints of societal expectations. I started small. I allowed myself to explore interests that were considered unconventional for my gender. I took up boxing, a sport traditionally dominated by men. The feeling of empowerment I experienced was transformative. With each punch, I shattered the stereotypes that had confined me for so long. I also joined a coding club, a field still largely male-dominated, and found a deep satisfaction in breaking barriers and proving that gender has no bearing on one's capabilities. My relationships began to evolve too. I formed deeper connections with friends who valued me for who I truly was, not who I was expected to be. I distanced myself from those who tried to confine me to a narrow definition of gender roles. With time, I learned to surround myself with positivity and support. This shift significantly improved my mental health and self-esteem. As I moved into adulthood, I continued to challenge gender expectations in various spheres of my life. In the workplace, I demanded respect and equal opportunities, unafraid to voice my opinions and assert my value. In my personal life, I built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibilities, deviating from traditional gender roles. It wasn't always easy, and I faced criticism and resistance. But every step I took towards authenticity brought me closer to inner peace. Breaking free from gender expectations is not a one-time event, but a continuous journey. It requires introspection, courage, and a supportive community. Social media, once a source of pressure, became a platform for me to share my journey and connect with others facing similar challenges. By being open and honest about my experiences, I hope to inspire others to question and redefine the roles imposed upon them. Today, I stand here proud of the person I have become. Overcoming gender expectations has not only liberated me, but also deepened my relationships and enriched my life. To anyone reading this, know that you have the power to redefine your identity, to break free from societal constraints, and to create a life that aligns with your true self. The road might be tough, but the reward, authenticity and genuine fulfillment, is worth every step of the way. Chapter 4: Media Representation of Masculinity and Femininity. Portrayal of men in media. The flickering screen had always been a companion, a silent witness to my evolving perceptions of manhood. From childhood cartoons to primetime dramas, the portrayal of men in media shaped my understanding of what it meant to be a man. As I sit here sipping my coffee, the memories of these representations play like a reel before my eyes, prompting a deeper exploration. Growing up, the heroes were always larger than life. They were strong, brave, often silent, and distant like an island that resisted the waves of vulnerability. From the square-jawed Superman to the rugged Rambo, these figures weren't just men, they were icons sculpted in an image of invincibility. It was exhilarating at times, even aspirational. I remember my younger self trying to emulate their stoic demeanor, their unwavering resolve. The media fed us these platonic ideals of heroism and strength, painting a picture that, while empowering, often felt out of reach for the flesh-and-blood boys like me. But the screen, for all its allure, also cast shadows. Not all portrayals of men were empowering or positive. The archetype of the alpha male, for instance, bred an unsettling sense of competition among the viewers. These characters often equated aggression, dominance, and emotional suppression with masculinity, leading many to internalize these traits as societal benchmarks. If you were not dominating, assertive, or emotionally impervious, were you failing at being a man? Through these lenses, vulnerability became a weakness, a chink in the armor. It was a problematic stereotype that affected not just individuals but society at large, creating a breeding ground for toxic masculinity. Just as my thoughts begin to settle into despair, a wave of optimism breaks through. The media landscape is ever evolving, and with it, the portrayal of men has started to gain new hues. Today's male characters are increasingly multifaceted. They show courage that includes emotional openness and strength rooted in compassion. Television series and films now explore the complexities of masculinity, depicting men as nurturers, mental health advocates, and allies in the struggle for gender equality. It's refreshing to see, for instance, a male character in a sitcom who is not afraid to cry, to express love and vulnerability without fear of judgment. Of course, social media plays a significant role in this cultural shift. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube have democratized representation. Real men from diverse backgrounds share their authentic stories, challenging the monolithic view of masculinity perpetuated by traditional media. Influencers and advocates use their reach to propagate a more inclusive and empathetic representation of men, proving that masculinity can be as varied and vibrant as humanity itself. As I reflect, I realize that the portrayal of men in media is a mirror reflecting societal values, while simultaneously shaping them. It's a dance of influence and reflection. My journey with these depictions has been one of introspection and growth, a constant questioning of what it means to be a man in today's world. The reel spinning in my mind blends both admiration and critique, but one thing remains clear: the narrative is evolving, and so are we. The tension bubbles as I contemplate the future. Tomorrow's media will continue to mold and redefine masculinity. The question lingers: how will the screen shape the next generation of men? Will it liberate them from the chains of outdated stereotypes, or will it ensnare them in new ones? Portrayal of women in media. Growing up, I lived vicariously through the stories told on television and in movies. My memories are vivid of the glamorous women who graced the screen, their beauty undeniable, yet their roles often all too predictable. They were princesses waiting for rescue, objects of desire, or perfect homemakers. It wasn't until later in life that I recognized how these portrayals shaped not just my understanding of womanhood, but society's as well. The objectification was subtle, insidious even. As a teenager, I remember looking at magazine covers screaming perfection in every glossy photograph. Women paraded their flawlessness with a smile, but thoughtful introspection revealed the unrealistic standards pursuing an unattainable ideal. It was then that I began to understand that what I was seeing was a carefully crafted illusion, one that marginalized real women and reduced them to mere ornaments. There was another layer, though, one that struck deeper. The limited roles available to women in media relegated them to the background or the sidelines. In action films, they were the damsels. In romantic comedies, the quirky best friends. Rarely did they take center stage in a meaningful, non-stereotypical way. My awareness broadened as I delved into stories and narratives, both on screen and off, that communicated a woman's worth through her actions, intellect, and heart, rather than her relationship to a male protagonist. Yet, societal shifts began to stir. Suddenly, strong, multidimensional female characters started to emerge. These women were not shoehorned into narrow tropes, but were allowed to be as complex and dynamic as their male counterparts. Their growth was refreshing. Imperfect and human, they navigated their worlds with agency and depth. Real heroines who inspired generations, these characters began to redefine the narrative around women in media. Through the lens of social media, perceptions began to evolve even more rapidly. Platforms like Instagram and Twitter became double-edged swords. They offered a stage for women to voice their truths and challenge outdated narratives, but they also laid bare the pressures of maintaining an image. As I scrolled through countless timelines, it became clear that the portrayals on traditional media were far from the complete picture. Social media had the power to either liberate or constrain, depending on how we engaged with it. The impact of these portrayals on society's perception of women is potent. When women are consistently seen as strong and multifaceted, society begins to value these traits more broadly. Narratives have the capacity to shape realities, influencing both men and women. Men start to see women as equals, leaders, and partners, not just in fiction but in everyday life. Women, on the other hand, see themselves reflected in more empowering and authentic ways, emboldening them to pursue their ambitions without restraint. It is a symbiotic evolution, where media portrays the changing dynamics of society, and society, in turn, demands more from its media. The influence of media on self-perception. Growing up, I didn't really think much about how I looked. The notion that my appearance held power over people's perceptions of me wasn't something I fully understood until I was old enough to see it reflected in the mirror of the media. Television, magazines, and later, social media, painted pictures of perfection. These images were so omnipresent that it became hard to escape their grasp. One of the most striking personal experiences I had was during my teenage years. I remember scrolling through Instagram, bombarded by photos of influencers with slim waists, flawless skin, and dazzling smiles. Each scroll seemed to plant a seed of doubt within me, comparing my own average body to their exceptional ones. Research supports that I'm not alone in this struggle. Various studies have shown that exposure to idealized body images on social media can lead to decreased body satisfaction, especially among adolescents. It's remarkable how media representations of gender play a role in shaping our self-esteem and body image. Advertisements often project a narrow portrayal of beauty. Women often slender and conventionally attractive, men bulging with muscles and rugged charisma. These reproduced standards bore into our subconscious, whispering that we fall short of what we are supposed to look like. For men, this can mean feeling inadequate if one's physique is not as chiseled as the next action hero's. For women, it might mean endless quests for the perfect skincare routine. One story that resonates with me comes from a close friend, Jennifer, who shared how media portrayals of beauty impacted her mental well-being. She explained that being constantly surrounded by images of seemingly perfect women made her hyper-aware of her flaws. At one point, she became so anxious about her looks that she hesitated to go out without makeup. This story, among many others, highlights the damaging effects these unrealistic standards can have. However, it's essential to acknowledge that my experiences and Jennifer's are part of a broader societal influence. Men suffer too. My friend Mark admitted that he felt pressure to hit the gym excessively after noticing how buff all the guys on his favorite TV show were. The comparisons gnawed at his confidence, pulling him down rather than lifting him towards a healthier self-perception. Interestingly, the rise of social media influencers and fitness gurus has doubled the impact, blending the lines between aspiration and reality. While some influencers strive to promote body positivity, the overwhelming presence of ideal physiques can be disheartening. I felt this disparity on a personal level when I tried emulating a fitness regime shared by a popular influencer. Despite my best efforts, I didn't achieve the same results, leaving me disillusioned and doubting my efforts. Yet, there is a silver lining. With awareness and education, we can mitigate the adverse effects of media portrayals. By diversifying the images we consume and promoting more realistic and varied representations of beauty and physique, we can foster a healthier self-perception. The journey toward self-acceptance, aided by these shifts, is an ongoing battle but one worth fighting. As the chapter of media influence closes for now, I can't help but reflect on the hope that we could all see our worth beyond the filtered lenses. The clock ticks forward, urging us to challenge these ideals and embrace the remarkable diversity that shapes us. The next swipe, the next post, perhaps they will bring forth a new wave of realism, one where every reflection is valued. Chapter 5: Intersectionality and Gender. Understanding intersectionality. My journey to understanding intersectionality began during a conversation with a close friend, Mia. As we sat in our favorite cafe, she began to share her experiences as a woman of color navigating the corporate world. Her stories were not just about being a woman or being black. They were about existing at the intersection of both identities, where the challenges and discriminations she faced were unique to her combined experience. It was a revelation that shattered my simplistic understanding of social categories. As a white woman, I had always considered gender inequality through the lens of my own experience. But listening to Mia, I realized how different, and more complex, her reality was. She spoke about instances when her competence was questioned both because of her gender and her race. The double burden of these intersecting identities weighed heavily on her, shaping a distinct form of prejudice that I could not fully grasp until that moment. Social media played a transformative role in broadening my perspective. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram became avenues where diverse voices shared personal narratives and systemic critiques. Hashtags like #SayHerName and #BlackGirlMagic revealed the ways in which traditional feminist movements had often neglected the struggles of women of color. These stories forced me to confront my own blind spots and privilege. Seeing the layers of discrimination people experienced based on a combination of their race, gender, class, and sexuality painted a more intricate picture of inequality. However, it wasn't until I started looking at my own social identity that I fully appreciated the depth of intersectionality. Being a white woman provided me certain privileges, yet as someone from a working-class background, I also encountered specific barriers. The nuances of my own journey taught me that our societal structures are not just sexist or racist. They operate on a complex matrix of oppression and advantage. Recognizing this matrix is pivotal in understanding intersectionality. The influence of society can't be ignored either. Institutions, from the workplace to the legal system, are often designed to prioritize certain identities over others. These biases are baked into policies and practices, making them difficult to dismantle. For example, maternity leave policies might fail to consider the additional burden on single mothers, especially those from marginalized communities. Social media often amplifies these injustices, providing a critical platform for activism and awareness, but also generating backlash and controversy. I realized that the first step towards change is listening. Every story and experience shared, whether online or in person, adds a crucial piece to the puzzle of understanding intersectionality. It's about recognizing the plurality of struggles and standing in solidarity with those whose journeys differ from our own. This understanding is not only essential for empathy, but also for effective advocacy. As I look back on my conversation with Mia, I see it as a pivotal moment in my ongoing education about intersectionality. It was a gateway to deeper empathy and a commitment to dismantling the intersecting forms of discrimination that thousands face every day. And as I continue to navigate my own intersectional identity, I carry forward the stories, struggles, and strengths of others into every step I take towards change. The intersection of gender and race. Growing up as a woman of color, the constant pressure to fit into a mold that never quite seemed to accommodate me was overwhelming. Gender norms dictated that I be gentle and composed, while societal stereotypes about my race painted a picture of strength and resilience that left no room for vulnerability. It was a continuous tug-of-war, finding myself stretched thin, struggling to balance the expectations placed on my shoulders. My identity was like a puzzle with pieces that didn't always fit together perfectly, but which I was forced to display with pride nonetheless. The unique challenges faced by people of different races in relation to gender norms are further exacerbated by the influence of social media. Constantly bombarded with images and narratives that celebrate a narrow and often unrealistic view of beauty, both men and women find themselves caught in a web of comparison. For me, the representation of women that I saw online rarely mirrored my lived experience. While some could relate to a sense of freedom and empowerment, my narrative was fraught with the dual pressures of racial and gender expectations. Even when platforms celebrate diversity, it often feels like a surface-level inclusion, ignoring the deeper, more complex layers of our identities. One evening, as I scrolled through my social media feed, an image caught my eye. It was a photo of a young woman with dark skin and curly hair, confidently posing in a way that defied the traditional norms I had grown up with. The caption read, "You redefine your narrative." It struck a chord within me. Could it be possible to carve out a space that allowed for authenticity, without the burden of societal expectations? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that change wouldn't come from society or the media alone. It had to begin with us, those of us who lived at the intersection of these identities, who felt the weight of those overlapping pressures. I began to notice others who, like me, were daring to reshape their lived experiences and narratives. It became increasingly clear that our stories were powerful, that we had the ability to challenge and redefine what it meant to navigate these intersecting identities. Perhaps the most poignant realization was that none of us were alone in this struggle. Men and women from different backgrounds grappled with similar challenges, though their experiences varied. Some found strength in community, while others discovered their voice by standing alone against the tide. Each story, each journey, was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. As I stepped into the reflection of another day, I felt a sense of communal solidarity coursing through me. We are stories, we are narratives yet to be fully told. Each shared experience, each conversation, chips away at the rigid barriers placed before us. Perhaps one day, social media and societal norms will celebrate the true spectrum of our identities. Until then, we write our own tales, one post, one story at a time, transcending the confines of expectation and redefining what it means to be both seen and heard. Challenges faced by marginalized genders. Living within the confines of societal expectations feels like wearing a costume that never quite fits. For someone like me, someone who doesn't fit neatly into the boxes labeled male or female, every day is an exhausting performance of gender roles I never auditioned for. The world around me insists on binary definitions, and navigating these waters feels akin to a tightrope walk over a chasm of misunderstanding and prejudice. Social media, that double-edged sword of connection and judgment, amplifies the complexity. On one hand, it serves as a vital lifeline, an avenue where I can connect with others who share similar experiences, a space where I can exist without the need to constantly explain myself. On the other hand, social media platforms teem with trolls and critics who thrive on anonymity to spew their vitriol. Disguised as opinions, these messages reverberate with hate and intolerance, making the digital landscape as treacherous as the physical world. At work, I endure the whispers and the sideways glances. Despite my qualifications, my job performance is constantly scrutinized through the lens of my gender identity. It feels as if my competence is forever in question, not because of my skills, but because of who I am. I've perfected the art of deflecting intrusive questions and quieting my true self to fit into the mold of what is expected. But the mental toll is significant. The layers of my identity are eroded bit by bit, day by day. I vividly recall an incident during a team meeting where a colleague accidentally misgendered me, setting off a wave of awkward silence. While some of my coworkers exchanged uncomfortable glances, others laughed, too eager to dismiss my experiences as trivial. The sting of their laughter lingered long after, gnawing at my sense of belonging. It was a stark reminder that acceptance wasn't just hard to achieve, it was nearly impossible. In these moments, where society's grip tightens, I find refuge in the community of others like me. It's in these spaces that I can breathe without restraint, where my existence isn't subject to the verdict of those who cannot or will not understand. These relationships become a sanctuary, a defensive shield against the harsh judgments that define every other aspect of my life. But even within these circles, the weight of external prejudice seeps in, a reminder that no place is completely free from the world's scorn. Every outing in public is a calculated risk, a strategic planning session that considers the time of day, the neighborhood, and even the manner in which I walk or hold myself. I remember a night vividly where onlookers jeered at me from across the street, their taunts echoing in the cold night air. Such encounters are commonplace, each experience melding into the next, a never-ending cycle of fear and resilience. It is these moments of raw reality that shape my existence, forcing me to confront the fundamental question: how can I be true to myself in a world that wishes I didn't exist? The answer is far from clear, but one thing remains certain: the battle for acceptance is one that I cannot abandon. For every hardship faced and every tear shed, there is also a spark of hope, a belief that change, however slow, is possible. Chapter 6: Relationship Dynamics. Communication Styles in Men and Women. The first thing I noticed when I entered the corporate world was the distinct difference in communication styles between men and women. It was like stepping into a room full of tangled wires, each one humming with its own peculiar frequency, yet all trying to play the same song. Sitting in my first team meeting, I observed how the men leaned back in their chairs, speaking in declarative tones. Their words were like direct lines, aiming straight to the point. In stark contrast, the women around the table leaned forward, nodding and making sounds of agreement to show engagement. Their sentences often started with qualifiers like "I think" or "I'm not sure," but it became obvious that these differences weren't just random quirks, but deep-seated behaviors influenced by societal norms. Men, often conditioned to be assertive and dominant, were more likely to take charge of conversations, to cut to the chase. On the other hand, women, taught to be collaborative and nurturing, often employed a more inclusive style. This wasn't just in the office, I'd seen it in social settings, family gatherings, even online. Social media magnified these dynamics, with platforms like Twitter and Facebook becoming battlegrounds for differing communication styles. A simple statement could snowball into a massive misunderstanding within seconds. It was a minefield, especially in a world where rapid-fire interactions left little room for nuanced expression or comprehension. I recall an incident involving my colleague, Laura. She was articulate and knowledgeable, yet she often found herself interrupted during meetings. Her suggestions, though valuable, seemed to evaporate in the whirlwind of assertive male voices. One afternoon, Laura came to me, visibly frustrated. "Why is it," she asked, "that when I propose an idea, it gets sidelined, but when Mark or Tom says nearly the same thing minutes later, it's hailed as brilliant?" I felt her frustration and knew it was a sentiment shared by many women in our organization. This wasn't just an isolated issue, it was systemic. Laura's experience highlighted how these differing communication styles could lead to women being undervalued and overlooked, despite their competence. While these gendered communication patterns could lead to misunderstandings and even conflicts, they weren't immutable. In fact, recognizing these differences was the first step towards bridging the communication gap. We could all benefit from adopting a blend of styles, men incorporating more empathetic listening and collaborative phrasing, and women embracing assertiveness to ensure their voices were heard. Social media, for all its flaws, also offered a unique platform to practice and observe these skills in real time. By carefully crafting our messages and paying more attention to others, we could mitigate misunderstandings. However, this isn't easy. Habits ingrained over a lifetime take effort to change, and the fear of stepping outside societal expectations can be paralyzing. I realized this as I tried to adjust my own communication style. It was a balancing act, swaying between directness and empathy, making sure I was neither too harsh nor too passive. The journey was revealing, a gradual untangling of wires. These subtle shifts did more than improve individual interactions. They reshaped the very culture of communication in our workspace. As I continue to navigate this complex terrain, I ponder the larger implications. What if we could all become fluent in each other's languages? Imagine the possibilities: personal relationships blossoming with deeper understanding, work environments becoming more inclusive, and social media turning into a space for genuine connection rather than conflict. The destination seems distant, but with each step, the wires smooth out a little more, transforming chaos into harmony. We're all threads in this intricate weave, and the beauty lies in how we choose to intertwine. Navigating power dynamics in relationships. I've often found myself contemplating the subtle yet profound ways in which traditional gender roles shape our interactions. It's not an easy conversation to start, especially when it's easy to dismiss these roles as outdated relics of a bygone era. But the truth is they have a lingering influence, weaving through the fabric of our romantic, familial, and professional lives. Growing up, the societal expectation was clear. Men were to be strong, stoic providers, while women were nurturers and caregivers. In my own romantic relationships, these predefined roles played out in often unspoken ways. For instance, there was always this underlying assumption that as a man, I was supposed to handle finances and be the one to propose major life plans. By contrast, my partners, even when they vocally supported equity, seemed to default to waiting for me to take charge. It wasn't an overt power struggle, but a subtle dance where I was the supposed lead. Social media exacerbates this dynamic. Picture-perfect relationships, where gender roles appear romanticized, bombard us daily. Couples posting about the perfect man, who surprises his girlfriend with a new car, or the ideal woman, who stays at home baking and nurturing the kids. It reinforces these traditional roles, even subconsciously. We absorb these images and stories, sometimes without critical examination, and they become a script we follow. Breaking free from these expectations has been a journey both challenging and fulfilling. One key revelation was realizing that power dynamics are ever present, even if they're subtle or benign. A balanced relationship requires continual dialogue, mutual respect, and a willingness to challenge these ingrained roles. For instance, I learned the importance of discussing financial decisions openly with my partner, not merely assuming responsibility due to my gender. Families are no different. Watching my parents, I saw the dynamic play out similarly, with my father making the big decisions and my mother being the emotional anchor. When I decided to challenge this norm in my own family, it wasn't always met with understanding. Some relatives saw it as my shirking responsibility or, conversely, my partner being controlling. But slowly, through patience and persistence, we began creating a new model, a partnership where power wasn't a single entity to be contested but a shared journey. In professional settings, the struggle is equally real but more overt. Women often face an uphill battle, with traditional roles casting long shadows over their authority and capabilities. Male colleagues sometimes unknowingly undermine female leadership, not out of malice but due to these ingrained stereotypes. It's a treacherous path to navigate, requiring both men and women to be conscious allies, continually advocating for genuine equality and respect. I've come to see active support and vocal acknowledgement of my female colleagues' contributions as crucial to this change. Achieving balance, I've found, starts with self-awareness and open communication. It's about recognizing our biases, challenging societal norms, and fostering an environment where equality is not just an ideal but a practiced reality. It's an ensuring that both partners feel equally valued and heard. Acknowledgement of past patterns helps break the cycle. It's not a utopian dream but a tangible goal, reachable through everyday actions and conversations. The road is not always smooth. There are days when traditional roles slip back in unnoticed, tensions rise, and misunderstandings occur. But each small step towards balance and mutual respect makes the journey worthwhile. As we continue to navigate these dynamics, we pave the way for future relationships based not on archaic roles, but on genuine partnership and equality. Balance in masculine and feminine energies. It wasn't until my late 20s that I became keenly aware of the intricate dance between masculine and feminine energies within me. Growing up, society had painted a rather clear line between the two. Masculinity was portrayed as strength, assertiveness, and unyielding logic. Femininity was softer, nurturing, defined by empathy and intuition. I always felt out of balance, as if forced to play a role in a script I hadn't written. Social media, with its ever-present influence, amplified these traits. Curated images of perfect lives, muscled frames, and epitomized femininity flashed on my screen. I found myself trying to fit into those molds. The men were assertive leaders, unwavering and stoic. The women, on the other hand, embodied grace, always attuned to the emotions of others, often sacrificing their own needs. In striving to emulate these extremes, I lost touch with parts of myself that didn't fit this narrow interpretation. During a particularly challenging period in my life, I met someone who seemed to exist outside these societal confines. Alex was remarkable in their balance. They could discuss business strategies with fervor and switch effortlessly to nurturing, offering a listening ear or comforting presence. It was like watching a symphony where the instruments didn't compete, but rather complemented each other. Intrigued, I began exploring these aspects within myself, seeking that elusive balance. Personal growth doesn't come from fitting into predefined boxes, I realized. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experiences and characteristics. I started by questioning my automatic responses. When faced with a crisis, did I want to charge forward with aggressive energy, or was there room for a more contemplative, empathetic approach? Relationships, too, began to transform. By allowing both energies to coexist, I found that I could communicate more effectively, understanding not just my own needs, but also appreciating the underlying currents of my partner's expressions. This equilibrium, I discovered, wasn't a destination but an ongoing journey. It required continual reflection and adjustment. Yet, the more I practiced, the more natural it felt. The formerly clashing energies became harmonious, guiding me toward a fuller, richer way of living. The true challenge, however, remained in navigating a world still largely confined by these traditional interpretations. Could I maintain this balance in the face of external pressures and societal expectations? Each day was a new test, an opportunity to realign and affirm my commitment to this holistic approach. As I delved deeper, questioning societal norms and the roles we are pressured to adopt, I wondered, had others also felt this imbalance? And if so, were they too seeking a more integrated way of being, or had they resigned themselves to the conventional dichotomies that defined masculinity and femininity? The desire to uncover these answers fueled my journey further, pushing me toward a revelation that threatened to upend everything I had come to understand. Chapter 7: The Importance of Self-Identity. Embracing Individuality Beyond Gender. Stepping onto the train that morning, I looked around and noticed the array of faces around me. Each of them harbored a unique story, their expressions reflecting the society that shaped them. A man in a tailored suit checked his watch, a young woman in jeans scrolled through her phone, and an elderly person read a worn-out paperback. Alongside them stood a teenager with vivid blue hair and a non-binary symbol on their shirt, beaming with a confidence that contrasted sharply against the subdued demeanor of others. It struck me then how deeply entwined we are with the societal expectations programmed into our minds from birth, Yet many of us fail to realize the powerful individuality waiting to be embraced beyond these traditional frameworks. Growing up in a world where societal norms delineate strict boundaries, it wasn't always easy to understand or embrace what lay beyond publicly accepted gender roles. These built-in beliefs dictated how we should walk, dress, talk, and even think. The skewed stereotypes from childhood toys to advertising campaigns subtly, yet persistently, reinforced a binary way of existence. It wasn't just the older generations either. Our generation too was faced with unspoken rules etched into every corner of our lives. School groups were segregated into boys' and girls' activities, leaving no room for those who felt out of place within those binary confines. I remember how often I struggled with the invisible weight of these expectations, going through the motions and acting parts that never quite fit the core of who I was. Social media's role in perpetuating these stringent stereotypes can't be overstated. Platforms like Instagram and Facebook became digital playgrounds where people curated perfect versions of themselves, shaped heavily by gendered visual cues. Influencers exhibited flawless physiques and lifestyles that conformed with what society dictated as male or female, making it even tougher for anyone who didn't fit into those parameters to feel validated. I often found myself scrolling through my feeds, comparing my quirks and nonconformities to their polished lives. This, in turn, bred an undercurrent of dissatisfaction and self-doubt. Yet, amidst all that, there was a small but growing community of voices that challenged these norms, celebrating a spectrum of identities and expressions which transcended traditional gender binaries. Slowly but surely, they became the beacon for people like me. Deciding to embrace my unique strengths and characteristics had both exhilarating and daunting moments. It was a choice to step away from the comforting numbness of blending in towards the uncertainty of standing out. But the more I allowed myself to explore and express beyond traditional gender norms, the more I discovered untouched reservoirs of creativity and strength within me. It wasn't just about rejecting the labels others thrust upon me, but truly understanding and owning who I was beyond any imposed boundaries. I wasn't another box to be ticked off in a societal checklist. I was a mosaic of experiences, thoughts, and emotions far too complex to be encapsulated by mere labels. And as I began to embrace this individuality, I saw the same transformation around me. People daring to break free and letting their spirits take the shape they were meant to. Tonight, as I sit in my small apartment, looking at the reflection in the mirror, I no longer see a fragmented identity desperately clinging to societal edges. Instead, I see a person, complete, and wondrously diverse. My journey showed me that embracing individuality isn't about denouncing the binary entirely, but understanding that it isn't the whole picture. It's about recognizing and celebrating the infinite shades between and beyond. We are not products of a one-size-fits-all assembly line, but vibrant tapestries woven from innumerable threads of experiences, strengths, and characteristics. Society's influence and the pressure exerted by social media will likely persist, but so will our capacity to redefine and reshape what individuality means. Embracing who we are doesn't have to be a struggle but a discovery, an ongoing narrative where we control the pen. Whether you find solace in conformity or liberation in divergence, remember it's your own unique essence that truly defines you. Beyond gender, beyond stereotypes, lies the powerful truth of individuality ready to be embraced. Self-exploration and gender. The journey began unexpectedly, like finding a vibrant seashell amidst grains of sand. I had always considered myself a confident, settled individual. But beneath the facade of stability, lies layers of questioning and curiosity about who we truly are. Today, particularly, I was ready to unfold some of those hidden layers. Armed with a journal and an open heart, I walked to my favorite park, seeking solace under the expansive sky. Everywhere I looked, society's upheld expectations danced around me, vaguely appearing as subtle as shadows and occasionally as persistent as the sun's glare. I settled under a majestic oak, feeling the bark's rough texture against my back. Flipping open my journal, a blank page stared back at me, mirroring the vast, undisturbed potential of self-discovery. The thought was both exhilarating and intimidating. Social media had always been a part of my life, a vibrant amalgamation of diverse narratives and voices. But it had also crafted a plethora of stereotypes and rigid norms. On one hand, it teemed with possibilities of exploration. On the other, it boxed identities within neatly labeled cubicles, often simplifying a fundamentally complex experience. As I began to write, my thoughts meandered like a river carving its path through mountains. The influence of society and digital spaces loomed over my reflections. Were my expressions of gender molded by the incessant hum of external validation and societal blueprints? Or did they reflect my true, unadulterated self, untouched by others' expectations? I scribbled down questions, allowing raw truths to flow out with the ink. Exploring my gender identity felt akin to navigating a labyrinth, every twist and turn revealing a new fragment of myself, yet some paths seemed daunting, clouded by societal stereotypes and doubts. The more I wrote, the lighter the burden of unspoken queries felt. Each sentence was like a thread, weaving together the tapestry of my authentic self. I realized that my journey was neither linear nor prescriptive. It was as fluid and boundless as my reflections under the clear sky. Encouraging self-discovery and authenticity meant embracing the discomfort, the uncertainty, and sometimes the opposition from societal norms. It demanded courage to express myself beyond the confines of traditional gender expectations and external influences. The sky above began to blush into hues of orange and pink, signaling the day's end. I closed my journal, feeling a sense of renewed clarity. My story was still being written, each day a new chapter of exploration and understanding. Yet, the act of introspection had ignited a spark within me, a commitment to honor my true identity, irrespective of societal constructs. Self-exploration was not a destination, but an ongoing journey, one that I was prepared to embark upon with unwavering authenticity. A cool breeze caressed my face as I walked back home, carrying the promise of new beginnings. In the tapestry of life, I was prepared to weave my unique threads, narratives of self and gender that were wholly and unapologetically mine. Finding authenticity in masculinity and femininity. It was during a summer where the golden hues of the afternoon sun kissed the horizon that I began to wrestle with the idea of my own authenticity. I had always thought that being a man meant projecting confidence, strength, and an unwavering tenacity. The societal expectations, perpetuated by the media, painted a picture of masculinity that was relentless and often void of vulnerability. I tried to live up to these standards, molding myself into the man I believed I was supposed to be. The same pressure enveloped my female friends. Social media inundated them with images of perfection, of women who were effortlessly beautiful, forever graceful, and eternally composed. Conversations would often revolve around how to achieve that ideal look, that Instagram-ready life. Underneath the facade, I could sense their exhaustion and the strain of maintaining an image that never felt completely true to who they were. We were all stuck in this labyrinth of expectations, unsure of where the authentic paths began and where the societal constructs ended. Finding my true self within the restrictive confines of traditional masculinity was liberating but daunting. I began to open up to my friends about my struggles and insecurities, initially met with surprise, but eventually with empathy and shared experiences. In a world where "man up" was still commonly thrown around, revealing my vulnerability was like stepping into an unfamiliar and uncertain terrain. Yet, it was also remarkably freeing. Sharing my journey led to deeper connections and a more profound understanding of what it means to be a man, not by societal standards, but by my own. Emma, one of my closest friends, shared her breakthrough in embracing femininity. She confessed to having spent years trying to fit into the narrow mold of what she thought femininity should be, desperately seeking approval from a society that quantified her worth through likes and comments. Letting go of those expectations, she said, was like shedding an old, restrictive skin. She started celebrating her quirks, her imperfections, her true self, and found that the relationships she formed from a place of authenticity were infinitely more fulfilling. The more we discussed our experiences, the clearer it became that authenticity is less about fitting into predefined roles and more about listening to our internal compass. Breaking away from the societal narrative wasn't just about rejecting stereotypes, but about rewriting our own stories. For me, this meant embracing a form of masculinity that included emotional expression and empathy. For Emma, it was about finding strength in her vulnerability and redefining femininity to include her own unique traits and talents. As our conversations continued, we noticed that others around us began to open up as well. Our vulnerability acted as a catalyst, encouraging others to share their journeys towards authenticity. The men revealed their fears and insecurities, the women spoke about their struggles and triumphs. The collective honesty was transformative, creating a space where authenticity was not only accepted but celebrated. Now, as I look back on that pivotal summer, I realize that the journey towards authenticity is ongoing. Society and social media continue to whisper their prescribed norms, but I no longer feel enslaved by their standards. I've learned that true masculinity and femininity are fluid and deeply personal, defined not by external expectations, but by our own authentic journeys. As the sun sets on another day, I am reminded that the quest for authenticity, though challenging, leads to a life of deeper meaning and connection. The horizon ahead is still open, filled with potential. Every day offers a new opportunity to discover and embrace who we truly are. As I embark on this continuous journey, I carry with me the lessons of that transformative summer, where I found the courage to be authentic in a world that often demands conformity. Chapter 8: The Role of Social Media in Gender Perception. Influencers and Gender Representation. It's a strange world we live in, where a swipe of the thumb could reveal something as trivial as a cat meme or as transformative as a gender discourse. As I scroll through endless feeds, I can't help but marvel at the sheer impact social media influencers have on shaping and sometimes even challenging gender norms. It wasn't always like this. Not too long ago, gender roles were as rigid as the flip phones we once used, dictated by deeply entrenched societal norms that seemed almost impossible to overturn. But now, it seems like a different universe entirely. Take Emma, a so-called beauty guru who first caught my attention with her flawless makeup tutorials. Over time, her channel evolved from simple beauty tips to discussing complex issues of gender fluidity and breaking the binary. She's an advocate, a voice for those unheard, questioning everything from traditional femininity to toxic masculinity. By sharing her personal journey and those of her followers, Emma disrupts the norms and expectations, encouraging her vast audience to think beyond the confines of conventional gender roles. On the flip side, there's Ryan. A fitness influencer whose muscles might make you think he walked straight out of a Marvel movie. He initially promoted a stereotypically hypermasculine image. But one emotionally raw video changed it all. Ryan opened up about his struggles with mental health, toxic masculinity, and how societal expectations to constantly man up nearly broke him. By vulnerably exposing his story, he challenged his followers to reconsider what it means to be manly. And then there's me, an observer and sometimes participant in this vast digital landscape. It's fascinating how influencers become both the mirrors and molders of our societal values. The influence of society on social media is undeniable, but what's equally significant is the reverse. It's like they're involved in this dance where each step they take can either conform to or smash through the established rhythm of gender norms. Yet, this influence is a double-edged sword. For every influencer challenging stereotypes, there are dozens perpetuating them, knowingly or otherwise. Trolling, cyberbullying, and the relentless pressure to fit a specific mold are ever-present threats. But therein lies the remarkable power of social media. Its capacity for duality, for being both a battlefield and a haven for progressive thought. As time goes on, the line between influencing and being influenced becomes increasingly blurred. What's clear, however, is that social media, with its influencers at the helm, remains a critical battleground for the future of gender representation. Every post, every story, and every video holds the potential to either uphold the status quo or ignite revolutionary change. Body image and gender expectations. It started innocently enough, flipping through glossy magazine pages or scrolling endlessly through social media feeds. Perfect bodies, flawless faces, and lives that seemed effortlessly glamorous. But as I dug deeper, I realized I was grappling not just with what I saw, but how I felt about myself in contrast. Society had set invisible guidelines, roadmaps that dictated what I should look like, act like, and aspire to be. And I, like many others, had fallen into this web woven by decades of gender-specific pressures. Growing up, the conversations around me subtly sculpted my understanding of the ideal body. For men, muscles and height were paramount, a mark of strength and virility. Women were praised for their slenderness and grace, an image of elegance wrapped in fragility. Straying from those ideals wasn't simply a personal failing. It felt like a betrayal of societal expectations. The pressure for men to be robust and unyielding often left little room for vulnerability. I remember my friend Eric, who confessed once in a moment of rare candidness how he starved himself for weeks to chiseling his physique more to the ideal male form plastered in advertisements. He would spend hours in the gym, not just because he enjoyed it, but out of a gnawing fear that he wasn't man enough. Meanwhile, my sister Sarah sat in front of her mirror, picking apart her appearance like an art critic examining a lackluster painting. She experimented with diets that promised miraculous transformations, all in the pursuit of being comparable to the celebrities she followed on Instagram. Her radiant smile, which I always thought was her most beautiful feature, seemed to dim as she obsessed over airbrushed images. Social media amplified these insecurities tenfold, serving as a constant reminder of what we should look like but often couldn't achieve. Filters and editing tools created a facade of perfection, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish reality from cleverly constructed fiction. Each like, each comment, seemed to validate this artificial image and degrade our authentic selves. The constant bombardment of fitspirations, beauty tips, and success stories gradually eroded our self-worth. What's deceptive about these platforms is their ability to make you feel connected, while isolating you in the depths of your insecurities. Shifting my perspective required an internal revolution. It was an unlearning of sorts. I began curating my social media feed, unfollowing accounts that made me feel inadequate and following those promoting self-love and realistic body standards. Personal anecdotes from people who embraced their imperfections and celebrated their unique attributes served as daily affirmations. I talked about my experiences openly, sharing my struggles and hearing others, finding solace in these shared narratives. It felt like each story exchanged chipped away at the heaviness society had placed on our shoulders. One transformative moment came when I stumbled upon a support group focusing on body positivity and mental health. I attended with skepticism, but each session proved cathartic. We weren't just addressing our insecurities, we were redefining beauty and strength on our terms. I learned strategies to combat negative self-talk, like affirming complete gratitude lists and engaging in activities that made me feel genuinely accomplished and happy. These were small steps, but they led to profound changes in how I viewed myself and others. As I reflect on this journey, I recognize that our bodies are more than vessels to be adorned and critiqued. They are the mediums through which we experience life, feel joy, face challenges, and express love. Evolving towards a healthier self-image doesn't happen overnight. It's a continuous process of self-awareness, support, and acceptance. We owe it to ourselves to break free from the shackles of societal and gender expectations and embrace the authentic, beautiful beings we are. Empowering gender diversity online. In the hush of dawn, I find solace in the quiet hum of my laptop coming to life. The cool blue glow of the screen casts shadows across my desk as I dive into the digital world that has become a second home to me. Online communities have always held a special place in my heart, like bustling virtual cities built on the bricks of connection and understanding. These spaces are more than just forums or social networks. They are sanctuaries where individuals of all gender identities gather to celebrate diversity and foster an inclusive environment. One of my favorite platforms is Spectrum Nexus, a vibrant online community dedicated to celebrating gender diversity. It's a place where people can share their stories, explore their identities, and support one another. Last week, I read a post from Alex, a non-binary person who detailed the journey of their self-discovery. Alex's words were raw and powerful, resonating with many of us who have felt the sting of societal norms pressing against our true selves. The comment section blossomed with encouragement and solidarity, a digital hug if there ever was one. Social media has been instrumental in not only amplifying these voices, but also in normalizing the conversation around gender diversity. Platforms like Instagram and Twitter are rife with hashtags like #genderfluid and #transvisibility, serving as beacons for those navigating their journeys. It's incredible to witness how these platforms have evolved from mere social hubs to influential stages where activism thrives and change happens. As I scrolled through Instagram one evening, I stumbled upon a live session by Maya, a genderqueer activist who uses their platform to educate and empower. Their energy was infectious, and it struck me how one voice could ignite a chain reaction of awareness and acceptance. However, the digital landscape is not without its shadows. The anonymity that shields us can also embolden those who seek to disrupt and harm. Gender-diverse individuals often face harassment, their virtual sanctuaries breached by ignorance and hate. It's a reminder that while the online world can mirror a utopia, it also reflects the darkest undercurrents of society. This duality is palpable, and navigating it requires resilience and an unwavering sense of self-worth. Yet, despite these challenges, the beauty of these communities lies in their resilience. In the face of adversity, they stand as pillars of strength, offering refuge and rallying for justice. Initiatives like the Safe Space Project aim to combat online harassment by providing resources and support to those affected. They teach us that empowerment is not solely about celebrating diversity, but also about protecting it fiercely. As I sit back and let the warmth of the monitor soak into my skin, I realize the profound impact these digital communities have had on me. They have taught me to embrace my identity unapologetically and to wield my voice as a force for positive change. The influence of society and social media on our understanding of gender is undeniable, but within the vast expanse of the internet, we have the power to redefine those influences, to mold a world where every identity is honored and celebrated. Chapter 9. Navigating Workplace Dynamics. Gender Bias in the Workplace. The email pinged into my inbox like any other, innocuous, almost dull in its subject line. Team meeting recap. I opened it, expecting yet another droning summary of touchpoints and action items. But my heart sank as I scanned the bullet points and noticed my name conspicuously missing from a new project list. It wasn't the first time. Working at a tech firm hailed for its inclusive culture should have meant something different. According to our company handbook, meritocracy was our guiding star. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that invisible barriers were boxing me in. When the new project assignments were announced, John, a fellow developer who joined 6 months after me, was given the lead role. It felt like a betrayal, a slap in the face that I couldn't easily deflect. After the initial wave of frustration passed, I began wondering if I was overreacting, letting my imagination run wild. But as the days went on, subtle slights collected like sediment. In meeting rooms, I noticed how often my suggestions seemed to bounce off an invisible wall, while male colleagues nodded at each other's ideas. I could almost see the invisible lines in the air, connecting them in a network I was never truly part of. One afternoon, I decided to confront my manager, Mike, a man who frequently posted LinkedIn articles about women in tech and had been to several women's leadership seminars. I walked into his office, a modern glass box bedecked with awards and certificates, and asked for a private chat. Mike leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his expression open but guarded. "Mike," I began, forcing calm into my voice. "I noticed I've been passed over for the new project leadership role. Could we discuss why?" "Of course, Jane," he replied, folding his hands thoughtfully. "You've been doing a great job, but we felt John had a bit more presence, leadership material." The word presence echoed in my mind. What did that even mean? Wasn't presence something I could develop if given the chance? I felt the weight of societal expectations, like ancient chains, holding me back. I wanted to scream that I had ideas, skills, and drive equal to any of my male counterparts, but I paused, knowing such outburst would only reinforce stereotypes. "Mike, I think there's a pattern here," I said carefully. "I've noticed women in this office often hit a ceiling. We're not given the same growth opportunities or visibility." Mike seemed taken aback, his eyebrows knitting into a frown. "Jane, this company prides itself on equality. Are you sure this isn't just a perception issue?" His words stung deeper than I expected. Was it a perception issue? The phrase ricocheted in my mind as I left his office. For days after, I reflected on the phrase and consulted various studies. Articles and social media posts revealed how common these biases were. A Harvard Business Review article spoke of the same perception issues in broader society, showing that even in supposedly progressive environments, biases lurked in the shadows. I decided to test the waters outside my direct experience. Over lunch, I struck up conversations with women from different departments: marketing, HR, finance. Each story bore a haunting similarity to mine. Talented, ambitious women laboring under an oppressive fog of biases were manifested in hiring practices, promotion paths, and even day-to-day interactions. The realization was empowering and devastating. I wasn't imagining this. Sharing our stories, we found solace in numbers. We began to strategize, aware that social media could be our ally, a megaphone to expose these issues. Knowing that going public could jeopardize our careers, we weighed the risks, driven by a fierce collective will to alter the status quo. And so, as we crafted a plan, balancing caution with determination, a new chapter in our professional lives began. It wasn't just about me anymore, but about breaking barriers for countless others. Each move felt like plotting a heist against a system built to keep us out. Could we really dismantle the biases from within? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: we were ready to fight. Leadership styles and gender. Walking into the conference room, I felt the familiar tension that always accompanied our team meetings. The rectangular table was a battleground of ideas, and today, our topic was particularly divisive: leadership styles and gender. As a CEO who had witnessed an array of leadership approaches over the years, I found myself questioning the stereotypes that society and social media often perpetuate. Why do we label certain leadership traits as male or female? I remember a time when a high-stakes project required us to bring in a new leader. The choice came down to two equally qualified candidates, Dan and Felicia. Within the management team, whispers floated around, contrasting Dan's assertive, strong style with Felicia's collaborative, empathetic approach. While these attributes are often linked to gender, the reality was far more nuanced. Felicia could be unwavering and decisive when needed, and Dan often demonstrated a remarkable ability to listen and unite the team. Our team's lively debates in the meeting room often extended to social media platforms that celebrated one-dimensional views of success. I found myself scrolling through countless posts glorifying alpha male dominance or championing nurturing female wisdom. However, leaders who truly succeeded in our organization shattered these binary stereotypes. They exhibited a blend of strength, empathy, decisiveness, and collaboration. These traits weren't confined by gender, but were cultivated by experience and personality. One memorable example involved a crisis that shook our company's foundation. Our data security was compromised, and our clients' trust hung by a thread. Felicia, initially seen by some as too gentle for such a high-pressure situation, spearheaded the crisis management. She made rapid, firm decisions, using her innate ability to remain calm and collected. Her leadership was nothing short of formidable. Simultaneously, Dan, known for his assertiveness, took a step back to listen to the team, gathering crucial insights that facilitated a swift resolution. As we huddled in the aftermath, reflecting on the successful recovery, it was clear that both leaders had transcended the stereotypical molds imposed on them. Felicia's assertiveness and Dan's empathic listening became lessons for all of us. We realized that the most effective leaders were those who could adapt their style to the demands of the situation, irrespective of gender. This experience reiterated my belief that leadership fluidity is the key. The forces shaping us, from societal norms to social media caricatures, often fail to capture the multidimensional nature of leadership. The challenge and opportunity lie in embracing and promoting this complexity. Our societal narratives need to evolve, encouraging both men and women to develop a full spectrum of leadership qualities. We ended the meeting on a reflective note, with the understanding that the qualities that make a good leader should not be gender-coded. We aimed to foster an environment where individuals, regardless of gender, could cultivate traits that would allow them to lead effectively. The ultimate takeaway was a call to action for each of us to challenge these stereotypes actively and to celebrate the diverse tapestry of leadership. Breaking the glass ceiling. Growing up, I had always believed the world was a place of boundless opportunities. My parents constantly encouraged me, saying that I could become anything I wanted if I worked hard enough. Yet as I navigated the labyrinth of my career, I realized that society's structures were riddled with invisible barriers, particularly for women striving to ascend the corporate ladder. But let's face it, recognizing these barriers is the first step to overcoming them. When I got my first job, I was engulfed in enthusiasm. I worked tirelessly, often at the expense of my personal life, fueled by the belief that merit would propel me forward. It wasn't until I started noticing the patterns that I realized something was amiss. Men who had joined after me were being promoted, given prime projects, and included in important meetings. My contributions were acknowledged, but never quite enough to move the needle. It dawned on me then, I wasn't just competing against colleagues, I was battling against a pernicious glass ceiling. My first real confrontation with this ceiling came during an annual review. I had spearheaded a project that doubled our department's revenue, yet my promotion was handed over to a male colleague with fewer accomplishments. Frustrated and disillusioned, I turned to social media. There, I found a chorus of voices, women with similar stories as mine. It was both comforting and infuriating. We live in an age where information is readily accessible, yet the knowledge of these tacit barriers was often cloaked in silence. The influence of societal norms cannot be ignored either. From an early age, girls are often unconsciously steered towards roles that are less demanding. These gendered expectations follow us into adulthood and infiltrate professional environments. They manifest in subtle ways, like being typecast into certain roles, facing skepticism when displaying ambition, or being judged through a harsher lens compared to our male counterparts. But knowledge is power. Hearing about other women's experiences gave me the fortitude to face my journey head-on. One pivotal moment came when I met Laura, a trailblazer who shattered the glass ceiling in her own right. Laura's story was electrifying. She had faced blatant sexism, was often the only woman in boardrooms, and was underestimated at almost every turn. One might expect her tale to be tinged with bitterness, but it was anything but. Laura had utilized every setback as a stepping stone, transforming every no into a different path to yes. Her advice was simple yet profound. Always advocate for yourself, because you can't expect anyone else to do it for you. Armed with Laura's wisdom, I began to notice a shift. I started to vocalize my needs, seek mentors who supported my growth, and most importantly, advocate fiercely for myself. Each small victory chipped away at the ceiling above me, bringing it ever closer to a breaking point. My journey hasn't been solitary. My male allies have played crucial roles too. Tackling this issue isn't a gender-exclusive fight. It requires collective effort and mutual understanding. Success stories abound, but they don't come without resilience and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The glass ceiling is real, but it isn't unbreakable. It demands relentless effort and courage, but oh, how it is worth it. The cracks may seem small at first, but with persistent pressure, they eventually fragment into irreparable shards. We are in an era where conversations about gender equality are louder than ever, amplified by both traditional media and social platforms. The more we engage, the more we raise awareness, and slowly, brick by brick, we build pathways to a world where the ceiling isn't just glass, it's non-existent. Chapter 10: Mental Health and Gender. Gendered Stigmas in Mental Health. It's funny how we all learn to wear masks so early. As a kid, you might cry just because you scraped your knee or lost a toy, and someone always tells you to toughen up. By the time you're an adult, showing anything less than strength feels like a failure. For men, vulnerability is often seen as weakness, while for women, emotions get dismissed as oversensitivity. These societal expectations can build invisible walls around us, making us feel isolated even when surrounded by people. I remember scrolling through social media one evening, seeing posts that ranged from polished influencers showing off their perfect lives to gritty updates about mental health struggles. Social media has this strange duality. It amplifies reality while distorting it at the same time. I stumbled upon a post by an old friend, Mark. He had posted a dark, gritty picture with captions that screamed out for help in masked metaphors. Concerned, I sent him a private message, asking how he was. Mark's reply was a deflection wrapped in humor. "I'm fine, just blowing off steam," he wrote. But the words felt hollow, like they were parroted from some script society had handed him. As men, we get programmed to avoid looking vulnerable. I wasn't convinced, but any further probing felt intrusive. Men are supposed to be rocks. Mark was just playing his expected role. On the other side of the spectrum, my friend Rachel often shared openly about her battles with depression. Each post was a mixture of courage and vulnerability. But even her honesty was met with mixed reactions. Some people cheered her for being brave, while others dismissed her as seeking attention. The comments ranged from empathy to harsh judgments. It was as if society decided that her emotions were either invalid or exaggerated simply because she was a woman. Both Mark and Rachel were suffering, yet the stigmas they faced were gendered and unique. Seeking help shouldn't be a brave act, it should be the norm, but societal expectations make it anything but. A culture that teaches boys to man up and girls that they're being too emotional creates a toxic environment for mental health. We learn to bottle up our feelings, fearing judgment more than the ailment itself. What struck me most was the internal conflict I saw in both Mark and Rachel. Social media had given them a voice, but it also put them under a microscope. The more I observed, the clearer it became that these stigmas were reinforced not just by their immediate circle, but by a broader, unseen societal pressure. Social media was both their platform and their prison, amplifying the very judgments they were trying to escape from. One evening, I sat across from Mark at our favorite pub. He looked drained, eyes reflecting the weight he'd been carrying. "You know," I began, choosing my words carefully, "it's okay to not be okay. Seeking help doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human." He looked down, a slight nod breaking his stone-like demeanor. Later, when I spoke to Rachel over a coffee, I reiterated the same sentiment. Society loves to label and judge, but your emotions are valid regardless. Seeking help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a courageous step towards healing. Her eyes welled up, a mixture of gratitude and relief washing over her face. As I walked away from both conversations, I realized that this wasn't just about them, it was about all of us. Mark and Rachel's experiences echoed a larger truth. Society's gendered stigmas in mental health are barriers that must be dismantled. Breaking through these walls isn't easy, but it's necessary. Because at the end of the day, seeking help should never come with a fear of being judged. Social pressures and psychological well-being. It's a feeling that's as subtle as a whisper, yet as overwhelming as a tidal wave. Every day, I walked a precarious tightrope, trying to conform to society's expectations while staying true to myself. This balancing act wore me down. For years, I thought I was alone, trapped in a cage constructed by stringent gender norms and societal expectations. Surely, I assumed, everyone else had it figured out, how to be the perfect man or woman. The pressure was everywhere. At every family gathering, I'd hear the same old questions. When are you getting married? Why aren't you more like your cousin, Jake? They didn't realize that these constant comparisons chipped away at my self-esteem. And then there's social media, a never-ending reel of seemingly perfect lives. The perfectly curated Instagram feeds, the incessant parade of engagements, promotions, and picture-perfect vacations made me feel inadequate. It was as if everyone else was living a flawless life, while I was left grappling with my insecurities. I remember one particular evening when the weight of those pressures became unbearable. I'd been scrolling through my Facebook feed, bombarded by one success story after another. It was like being assaulted by everyone's highlight reel, while I was stuck in my blooper reel. I felt the walls closing in. My heart pounded and my hands shook. That's when I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to find a way to cope, to shield myself from these incessant pressures. Understanding that these societal expectations were essentially a facade was the first step. It wasn't easy to accept this, especially when you've internalized these norms from a young age. I began to seek out resources that could offer me support and coping strategies. Therapy became a safe haven, a place where I could be myself without judgment. I learned how crucial it was to separate my self-worth from society's arbitrary standards. I also discovered the power of mindfulness and self-compassion. Practices like meditation helped ground me, providing inner peace amidst the chaos. By focusing on the present moment, I began to let go of my anxieties about measuring up to societal expectations. Self-compassion allowed me to treat myself with the kindness I so freely offered others, but seldom granted to myself. Building a supportive network was another game changer. I sought friends who understood and respected my struggles. They became my anchors, reminding me that I didn't need to fit into the stereotypical mold to be valid or worthy of love. Online forums and support groups also became invaluable, providing a sense of community and belonging that I hadn't realized I needed. Now, I'm on a journey to redefine what it means to be me, independent of societal expectations. The journey isn't easy, nor is it linear, but it's profoundly liberating. Each day, I'm learning to embrace my imperfections and celebrate my individuality. I've come to understand that true well-being isn't about conforming to external standards, but about honoring my own emotional and psychological needs. As I navigate this complex landscape, I realize that acknowledging these pressures is the first step toward liberation. It's a journey that demands courage, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of self-acceptance. And as I stand here at the precipice of my own self-discovery, I invite you to step away from the shadows of societal expectations and into the light of your authentic self. Seeking support for gender-related issues. I remember the first time I seriously considered reaching out for support concerning my gender identity. It was an evening like any other, my hands trembling as I scrolled through countless forums and social media pages. Each story I read echoed my own feelings of confusion and isolation. How could I, someone who had always been so sure of themselves, feel so utterly lost now? The pressure to conform to societal norms weighed heavily on me. I felt a sense of urgency, a desperate need to find someone who understood, who could offer a guiding hand. It became clear that I wasn't alone in this journey. Between the hashtags and the heartfelt posts, I found communities of individuals who were going through the same struggles. Social media, often a double-edged sword, became my lifeline. Platforms like Instagram and Twitter, once seen as trivial hobbies, transformed into crucial resources. Here, I found courageous voices sharing their stories, unveiling the raw truth about gender identity. These accounts provided comfort, a virtual hug that reminded me I was not alone. The influence of society on our perceptions of gender is profound. Gender norms are ingrained in us from birth, dictating how we should behave, dress, and even think. For many, breaking free from these expectations is a monumental task. I found myself questioning everything I had ever known about myself. The societal pressure was intense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown my true identity. But amidst the chaos, I found pockets of support, both online and offline, that provided the strength I needed to swim back to the surface. Support can come from unexpected places. During a particularly tough week, I decided to confide in a close friend. They had always been open-minded, but I feared their reaction. To my relief, they listened without judgment, offering unwavering support. This bolstered my courage to seek professional help. Finding a therapist who specialized in gender issues was another crucial step. The sessions were enlightening and provided practical advice on coping mechanisms and navigating social interactions. Discovering local support groups was equally significant. These groups were safe spaces where I could talk freely and connect with others on a similar path. Meeting face-to-face with people who validated my feelings was incredibly empowering. It's one thing to read about others' experiences online, but it's another to see and hear them in person. This tangible sense of community was the reassurance I needed to continue my journey. As I delved deeper into my quest for support, I realized the importance of self-education. Books, articles, and documentaries became my tools for understanding the complexities of gender identity. Knowledge gave me the confidence to articulate my feelings and advocate for myself effectively. I learned about the spectrum of gender, the history of gender roles, and the ongoing struggles for gender equality. Each piece of information was a stepping stone to self-acceptance. The journey of seeking support for gender-related issues is ongoing. There are days filled with clarity and others shrouded in doubt. But each step forward, whether it's finding a supportive friend, joining a community group, or simply educating oneself, is a victory. It's a journey that requires patience, resilience, and the courage to be true to oneself. As I reflect on my journey, I can't help but think about the countless others who are still searching for that first glimmer of understanding. The thought spurs me into action. To share more, to connect more, to be that beacon of hope for someone lost in the same turbulent seas I once navigated. And as I prepare to type my next post, I can feel the weight lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose and solidarity. Chapter 11. Embracing Vulnerability and Strength. Redefining Strength in Masculinity. I used to think strength was all about physical prowess. Growing up, society hammered into me the idea that men needed to be stoic, invulnerable walls of muscle. It wasn't until I faced my own emotional turmoil that I began questioning those traditional notions. I remember scrolling through social media one night, bombarded by images of chiseled physiques and warriors who seemingly never cracked under pressure. Despite their perfect exteriors, I wondered about the lives they hid behind those screens. It was a late night when, feeling particularly lost, I stumbled upon a video that changed my perspective. A man, visibly strong in every conventional sense, openly discussed his battles with depression. It wasn't just his story that resonated with me, but the way he laid himself bare for the world to see. Vulnerability, I learned, is a different kind of strength. The video had thousands of comments, men and women alike, sharing their own struggles and applauding his bravery. If this was the kind of impact one man's honesty could have, what did that say about our society's definition of strength? The more I engaged with this newfound idea, the more I saw it taking root in everyday life. At the gym, I started conversations that went beyond bench press records. Instead of competing, we began sharing our struggles, emotional scars, and ways we were trying to heal. I even noticed a shift in my closest friendships. No longer were our meetups just about sports scores and banter. We delved into our fears, anxieties, and hopes. This brought us closer than ever before. Despite these positive experiences, redefining strength wasn't without its challenges. There were still societal pressures and skeptic looks questioning why I was softening. Social media, too, was a double-edged sword. While it could inspire, it also perpetuated the archaic image of the invincible man. But I found it more liberating to embrace my entire self, rather than conforming to a narrow, outdated image. The turning point came during a conversation with my father. A staunch believer in traditional masculinity, he had always been my model of strength. When I confided in him about my struggles with anxiety, I expected rejection, maybe even ridicule. Instead, he listened, and for the first time, shared his own fears, how he had been conditioned to hide them. Our relationship transformed. We became pillars of support for each other, rather than mere symbols of toughness. As I navigate this journey, one thing becomes abundantly clear: real strength is multifaceted. It's in facing our emotions head-on, embracing vulnerability, and standing resilient in the face of inner battles. It's empowering men and women to redefine what it means to be strong, to be brave. The path ahead may be filled with misconceptions and resistance, but if we walk it together, openly and authentically, we can reshape an entire narrative. The power of vulnerability in femininity. From a young age, society painted a picture of strength that seemed diametrically opposed to vulnerability. Men were to be stoic pillars, and women were often expected to be delicate yet unwavering. As I navigated my own femininity, I found myself trapped between these contrasting paradigms. My upbringing taught me to be resilient and independent, while societal norms urged me to embrace my sensitivity, often considered a hallmark of traditional femininity. Social media amplified these conflicting messages, creating a distorted mirror of what it meant to be a strong woman today. I'd scroll through countless posts #, #StrongIndependentWoman, each one showcasing perfection through filtered lenses. The curated lives of others began to feel like standards I couldn't possibly meet or, worse, contradictions that left me confused about my own identity. Amid this noise, I lost sight of the power hidden in vulnerability. It wasn't until a deeply personal experience that my perspective shifted. After a tumultuous breakup, my carefully constructed facade crumbled. Heartache exposed my raw, unfiltered emotions to the world and, more importantly, to myself. Initially, I felt shattered, scared of being perceived as weak. But as days turned into weeks, something extraordinary happened. My vulnerability became a conduit for deeper connections. Friends and family, drawn by my authenticity, offered support I had never felt before. Sharing my true self, complete with flaws and fears, they saw not weakness, but a profound strength. It was as if my willingness to be open had granted them permission to do the same. Gradually, I realized that vulnerability wasn't a deficit but a powerful asset. It was a bridge to empathy, compassion, and understanding, elements essential for any meaningful relationship. Embracing my vulnerability didn't diminish my strength. It redefined it, creating room for personal growth I hadn't thought possible. I started to see that traditional femininity, often characterized by emotional sensitivity and nurturing qualities, held an intrinsic form of power, one that social media and modern society could not fully comprehend or replicate through superficial mediums. Men, too, found resonance in my story. Many approached me, sharing their own struggles with vulnerability, feeling pressured to maintain an unyielding front. We discovered a common ground, teaching each other that opening up wasn't a betrayal of strength but a celebration of it. These connections became a testament to a simple yet profound truth. Strength and vulnerability are not mutually exclusive, they are symbiotic. Embracing this duality allowed us to foster deeper connections and evolve together. As this understanding deepened, I began to share my journey more openly, both online and offline, hoping to inspire others to reevaluate their perceptions. My posts weren't just filtered snapshots anymore. They were glimpses into an ongoing, authentic exploration of strength in vulnerability. The response was overwhelming, reinforcing the notion that many of us crave this genuine connection, far beyond the facades we present to the world. In the end, society, with all its evolving norms and influences, hadn't fully embraced the power of vulnerability, particularly within traditional femininity. But I had. And in doing so, I discovered a well of strength I never knew existed, sparking a ripple of change in how we viewed ourselves and each other. It's a journey that's far from over, but one that continues to teach me the unparalleled power of being truly, unabashedly vulnerable. Healing gender wounds and trauma. As I sat in my favorite coffee shop, swirling the remnants of my third cup of coffee, memories of growing up flooded back. It was here, in a place like this, that I first started to recognize the chains I'd been unknowingly shackled with, the invisible expectations tied to my gender. Society's whispers were louder than any scream. Be tough. Don't cry. Provide. The weight of these words was crushing, yet I lugged them around like badges of honor, oblivious to the emotional toll they would take. It wasn't until my later years that I began to see how deeply these societal expectations had wounded me. I found myself in therapy, unraveling the tightly wound ball of emotional scars. My therapist once said, "Healing is not about creating new wounds, it's about properly addressing the old ones." Most days, those old wounds bled into my relationships and personal identity, leaving me confused and hollow. I realized that my concept of manhood was not only outdated, but also harmful to my well-being. For years, I wrestled with feelings of inadequacy, guilt, and anger. Agony bubbled up inside me every time I felt I wasn't living up to the societal ideal of a real man. It took countless sessions and an immense amount of courage for me to articulate these fears, to give voice to my vulnerabilities. I began to understand that healing involved breaking down these rigid constructs that had been ingrained in me since birth. It was terrifying, yet the freedom that came with this self-discovery was indescribable. Our generation is haunted by the mirage of perfection, a facade constructed brick by society and, more recently, supercharged by social media. It's almost suffocating how platforms like Instagram and Facebook impose unachievable standards. People seldom post their failures, heartbreaks, or genuine moments of weakness. They curate their lives, presenting a polished version that only fuels our insecurities. I've seen it firsthand, the impact it has on both men and women, including myself. I remember the first time I broke away from these toxic norms. There was no sudden epiphany, no grand realization. It began with small acts of defiance, unfollowing accounts that made me feel less than, sharing my raw emotions on social media. It was terrifying to peel back the layers, to show the world my true self. And then something magical happened. People began to respond. Not with judgment, but with empathy and understanding. The digital world, with all its flaws, became a space for genuine connection and healing. Yet, every day remains a battle. The allure of curated perfection tugs at my resolve, tempting me to retreat into the shadows of my vulnerabilities. Through all of this, I've learned that healing is not linear. It's a series of ups and downs, a constant dance between regression and growth. The vital part is that with each step back, I take a step forward with renewed strength and a little less of the weight society has placed on me. One of the pivotal moments in my journey was joining a support group, a safe haven where men and women alike shared their stories, their wounds. Through these sessions, I discovered that my scars were not unique. They were echoes of shared pain, shared trauma. We laughed, cried, and grew together, constructing new visions of what it meant to be whole, to be human. The power of community in healing cannot be understated. It's an affirmation that we are not alone in our struggles, that there is collective strength in our vulnerabilities. The process of unraveling these deep-seated beliefs is painstaking. It involves questioning everything and embracing uncertainty. Rosa, a friend from the group, once said, "We're like caterpillars, shedding the constraints of societal expectations to become butterflies." Her words resonated deeply with me. Each therapy session, each conversation, each moment of self-reflection was a step toward shedding those constraints. It was an act of defiance against a world that tried to define me. Today, as I write these words, I realize that healing gender wounds and trauma is not just a personal endeavor but a societal one. We must collectively challenge these rigid norms and create spaces for authentic self-expression. It's a call to men and women everywhere to break free from the shackles of expectation, to honor our true selves, and to support each other in this journey of healing and growth. The path is daunting, but together, we can navigate it, one step at a time, until the weight of societal chains is nothing but a distant memory. Chapter 12: Parenting and Gender Expectations. Raising Empathetic Boys. The first time I saw my son cry, really cry, something stirred within me. As a father who grew up around traditional ideals of masculinity, seeing tears in his eyes felt like a moment of both vulnerability and awakening. A part of me was compelled to tell him to man up, but another part yearned to let him be, to allow him to feel his emotions fully. This tension between teaching strength and fostering empathy became a journey that would redefine our lives. In our society, there's an unspoken rulebook for boys that begins to be handed out from the moment they can walk. Boys don't cry. Boys are tough. Boys are strong. These tenets are pumped into their lives through various channels: family, peers, and notably, social media. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok glorify certain masculine traits while subtly shaming others. It's no wonder that boys grow up feeling the pressure to conform, to mask their emotions, and to cast aside empathy as a weakness. Yet, the act of empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is a cornerstone of humanity. If we strip boys of this trait, what are we left with? In our home, my wife and I decided to challenge this toxic norm. We made a conscious effort to talk about feelings openly. We set an example by sharing our own emotions and encouraging our son to express his. This wasn't always easy, especially when society seemed determined to undo our efforts at every turn. One afternoon, while scrolling through his social media feed, my son stumbled upon a video that mocked a boy for crying after failing a test. The comments were brutal: "Be a man, grow up, and stop being a baby." He came to me, phone in hand, eyes wide with confusion. "Dad, why do they say that?" he asked. Taking a deep breath, I told him that strength isn't about hiding your tears. It's about understanding why you feel pain and having the courage to face it. In that moment, I felt the weight of my own father's teachings, the generations of toughness that had been passed down, and I chose a different path. Conversations like this became more frequent in our household. We navigated the labyrinth of societal expectations together, examining the messages he received and discussing their impact. It wasn't just about shielding him from harmful norms, but empowering him to question them. My wife, with her own experiences, brought another layer of insight. She would often remind him, and me, that empathy and emotional intelligence were not gendered traits but human ones. As he grew older, I noticed a change. He became more attuned to the feelings of others, more willing to offer a comforting word or a listening ear. But my resolve was truly tested the day I found him consoling his friend, who was grappling with the divorce of his parents. Seeing my son, arms wrapped around his friend, whispering words of comfort, brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew we were doing something right. Nurturing empathy isn't just a mission for parents, it's a societal endeavor. The world we shape will be the world our children inherit. As fathers, mothers, teachers, and mentors, we must dismantle the damaging myths and rebuild a culture of understanding. And as we continue this journey, one thought lingers in my mind. If we can raise empathetic boys today, we can create a kinder, more compassionate world tomorrow. Empowering girls to embrace ambition. I remember the first time I looked into my niece's eyes and saw the spark of curiosity that mirrored my own when I was young. In a society that forever insists on fitting individuals into neat little boxes, encouraging ambition in girls is akin to fostering a fire that can illuminate not only their lives but the entire world. This mission felt deeply personal, like an echo from my own past, when my dreams seemed too grand for the confines of the community around me. The role that society plays in shaping the ambitions of girls cannot be overstated. From an early age, they are bombarded with mixed messages. Be confident, but not bossy. Dream big, but don't outshine the boys. It's an exhausting tightrope walk, and the influence of social media only sharpens this edge. With filtered perfection flashing on every app, it's easy to believe that falling short of those standards means falling into obscurity. However, there is immense power in providing girls with role models who embody both ambition and authenticity. When I introduced my niece to stories of women breaking boundaries, her eyes glowed with newfound determination. Whether it's a female astronaut, a pioneering scientist, or a passionate entrepreneur, these narratives plant seeds of possibility. If they can do it, why can't I? She often asks, her voice laced with youthful optimism. Strategies for nurturing this ambition are often simple yet profoundly impactful. One method is to encourage girls to voice their dreams and validate their aspirations. It's about more than just listening. It's about engaging with their ideas and providing constructive feedback. When my niece shared her desire to become a coder, we signed up for an online course together. The experience was transformative, not because of the technical skills acquired, but because of the shared belief that her dreams are worthy of pursuit. Another strategy involves creating environments where girls feel both challenged and supported. Whether it's joining a sports team, participating in a debate club, or tackling a science project, these experiences build resilience and self-confidence. I watched my niece struggle, fail, and rise again during our weekly coding sessions, each setback becoming a stepping stone towards her greater goal. The journey to fostering ambition in girls also means addressing our own biases and becoming aware of the unconscious ways we might limit their potential. It's a continuous process of learning and unlearning, of breaking down old barriers to make space for new possibilities. When we, as adults, demonstrate ambition in our own lives, we set a precedent. They see that dreaming big is possible at any age. The most crucial lesson in this journey, however, is to teach girls to embrace their unique paths. Social media tends to present a monolithic standard of success, but real ambition blooms in diverse and unexpected ways. Whether my niece becomes a coder or decides to pursue a completely different dream, the essence lies in the courage to chase her ambitions with unwavering resolve. As I reflect on these experiences, I'm filled with hope. Empowering girls to embrace ambition is not just a gift we give them, it's a transformative force that reshapes our society. It promises a future where the boundaries of possibility stretch farther than today's horizon. And in the flicker of my niece's eyes, I see that very future unfolding, one dream at a time. Challenging gender norms in parenting. As parents, we often find ourselves navigating uncharted waters, especially when it comes to rearing our children outside the traditional gender norms. From the moment I became a father, I knew that I wanted my children, regardless of their gender, to grow up unburdened by the stereotypical roles society tries to enforce upon them. My wife and I made a conscious decision to raise Jamie and Alexa to be whoever they wanted to be, without the constraints of what boys and girls are supposed to do. Our journey began with something as simple as clothing. Society has long dictated that blue belongs to boys and pink to girls. But in our household, colors are simply colors, expressions of individuality and mood. We let Jamie choose a bright pink raincoat he adored, and Alexa often dressed in her brother's hand-me-downs without a second thought. We noticed how these small acts subtly reinforced a sense of freedom in our children. They became more confident in making decisions about their identity and preferences. We were not naive about the influence of society and social media. Despite our best efforts at home, both Jamie and Alexa faced questions and sometimes ridicule at school. Kids, mirroring the biases of their surroundings, sometimes poked fun at Jamie's pink raincoat or Alexa's firefighter toys. We encouraged them to stand proud and educated them on how to articulate their choices. We taught them that empathy and understanding were far stronger weapons than conformity. Social media amplified our mission. We used our platforms not just to share our journey, but to build a community of like-minded parents. The more stories we encountered, the clearer it became. We were not alone in our endeavors. Parents from around the world shared how they defied societal norms in various ways, from the toys they bought to the lessons they instilled in their children. Together, we formed a microcosm of change agents, challenging the status quo with every post, comment, and share. One evening, as I tucked Jamie and Alexa into bed, Jamie turned to me and asked, "Dad, why do some people think boys can't like pink?" I paused, thinking back to my own upbringing layered with unspoken rules and expectations. "Because people often fear what's different," I replied. "But remember, those differences make you unique and strong. Never let anyone's narrow view limit your boundless potential." Alexa, already half asleep, murmured her agreement, and Jamie nodded thoughtfully. Our commitment to raising well-rounded children who questioned norms and embraced diversity was being tested more than ever. A parent from Jamie's school had lodged a complaint about our unorthodox parenting style, leading to an uncomfortable meeting with the principal. We left the office with our resolve even more fortified, knowing that the road to change is seldom easy. Each challenge, whether from society, school, or social media, only deepened our belief that we were on the right path. Chapter 13. Building Healthy Friendships and Communities. Embracing Emotional Support. I remember the first time I tried to open up about my feelings. The words felt heavy, as though they carried the weight of years spent hiding behind a facade. Society had always told me, and others like me, that vulnerability was a weakness, something to be suppressed rather than expressed. Growing up, the boys around me echoed this sentiment. Emotions were seen as a liability, a chink in the armor that we were supposed to wear proudly. It wasn't until university that I began to see things differently. One chilly evening, A friend confided in me about his struggles with anxiety and depression. As he spoke, I could see the relief in his eyes, the way a burden seemed to lift as he shared his story. Our conversation opened a floodgate within me, challenging the stereotypes that had once held me captive. Why did we, as men, find it so hard to discuss our emotions? Why was it deemed acceptable, heroic even, for women to share their feelings, yet a sign of weakness for us? The answer, I realized, lay in the deeply ingrained societal norms that dictate our behavior. From a young age, men are taught to be stoic and resilient, to man up and bear the brunt of their hardships in silence. Women, on the other hand, are often encouraged to be nurturing and emotionally expressive. These roles, sadly, have boxed us all in, creating chasms in our ability to connect with one another genuinely and openly. I decided to break the mold and sought professional help. The process was daunting, peppered with moments of doubt and fear of judgment. But as I sat in that small, dimly lit office, my therapist's gentle prompts coaxed out the emotions I had long buried. It was a revelation to learn that seeking emotional support was not just acceptable, it was essential for mental well-being. Social media often exacerbates these stereotypes, portraying curated lives where vulnerability is filtered out. The endless scroll of smiling faces and triumphant posts can make us feel more isolated in our struggles. It's a stark contrast to the raw, unfiltered conversations that take place behind closed doors, away from the public eye. The pressure to conform to these idealized versions of ourselves can be overwhelming, making it even harder to reach out when we need help the most. But change is possible. I began sharing my journey more openly, encouraging others to do the same. Gradually, I saw a shift in my circle of friends and family. Conversations grew deeper, and the walls we had built around our hearts started to crumble. Emotional support became a two-way street, with both men and women participating in a dance of empathy and understanding. Breaking down these stereotypes is not just about changing individual behavior, it's about creating a cultural shift. It means challenging the narratives that have long dictated our emotional expressions. It means recognizing that vulnerability is a strength that binds us together, making us more resilient and connected as human beings. As I look back on my journey, I realize that embracing emotional support is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to our shared humanity. It's a call to dismantle the barriers that prevent us from seeking the help we so desperately need. It's an invitation to redefine what it means to be strong, not as an absence of emotion, but as the courage to embrace it fully. The road to emotional freedom is long and fraught with societal hurdles, but every step forward brings us closer to a world where both men and women can express their feelings without fear or judgment. In this journey, we find not only support but also a deeper connection to ourselves and each other. Creating inclusive spaces for all genders. The twilight was settling in as my colleagues and I gathered around the round table, coffees in hand and fervor in the air. Our company was embarking on a journey to redefine inclusivity within our walls, and our mission was clear: create an environment where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, felt seen, heard, and valued. The pressure was on, but so was our determination. What does inclusivity mean to you? Adam's voice broke through the hum of our thoughts. It was a simple question, but one that seemed to beckon layers of introspection. Glancing around, I saw nods, but also a glimmer of uncertainty. This was not going to be a checklist exercise. It was going to be personal, deep, and at times, uncomfortable. For me, inclusivity began with language. I recalled an instance at a previous job where a colleague constantly misgendered another, despite repeated corrections. The misgendered individual had eventually left, not with a fiery exit, but with a defeated silence. Language, I decided, was our first step. We needed to integrate gender-neutral pronouns and drop the unnecessary binary distinctions. Instead of ladies and gentlemen, we could embrace everyone or folks. We weren't just changing words, we were changing mindsets. The ripple effect of social media couldn't be ignored. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram were no longer just spaces for personal expression, they were battlegrounds for social justice. How often had hashtags like #transrightsarehumanrights soared to trending? How often had stories of discrimination become viral threads, pulsing with empathy, rage, and solidarity? I realized that our corporate social media presence had to reflect our internal values. Sharing educational content, spotlighting voices from diverse gender identities, and owning up to previous shortcomings could turn our followers into allies. Our conversation took an emotional turn when Laura shared her story. She spoke of her sibling, Alex, who identified as non-binary. Laura recounted the heartache and constant advocacy it took within their tight-knit family and conservative community. Tears gathered at the corner of her eyes when she thanked us for making this commitment, not just as a corporate policy, but as a moral imperative. In that dimly lit room, her lived experience became our education, her gratitude our fuel. Then came the practical tips: gender-neutral restrooms, inclusive dress codes, and non-discriminatory healthcare policies. For many, these were checkbox items. But as we delved deeper, it became clear that true inclusion meant embedding respect into the very fabric of our corporate culture. It meant regular training sessions where real stories were shared, where people could speak up without fear of retribution. It meant partnerships with organizations that championed gender inclusivity beyond our office walls. I began to feel a gnawing anxiety. Was this enough? Were we bold enough to challenge the ingrained societal norms that had shaped us? The clock was ticking, and our social audit was nearing. We needed more than policies. We needed to truly embody the change we wished to see. Amy, our HR head, suggested we bring in external consultants, experts who had dedicated their lives to this advocacy. The idea was met with unanimous agreement, and a hint of hope began to twinkle in the room. As the meeting drew to a close, we each made a silent vow. Inclusive spaces weren't just about fixing the now, they were about reshaping the future. We had to think expansively, act decisively, and most importantly, continue to listen. The journey was daunting, filled with potential landmines and societal pushback, but it was our path to walk. Stepping out into the crisp night, I glanced at the office windows reflecting the bustling city. It dawned on me that our mission, though demanding, was crucial. In an ever-diverse world, we needed to create sanctuaries where no one felt invisible. The challenge was immense, but failure was not an option. For the Alex, for those silenced by misgendering, and for everyone yearning for recognition, we would build and rebuild until inclusivity was no longer an exception, but the norm. Strength in unity and diversity. Imagine stepping into a room filled with voices, each uniquely resonant, yet harmoniously blending into a single melody. That was the essence of my new workplace, a melting pot of genders, backgrounds, and perspectives. Coming from a fairly homogeneous environment, the change was overwhelming at first. But, with time, I came to understand the true power of embracing diversity. Our team meetings were a revelation. In those huddles, ideas sparking from various minds often transformed into groundbreaking solutions. I remember an instance with Maya, whose background was in psychology. Her approach to problem-solving was different. She would dive into the human aspect of the issue, a perspective that was often overlooked. Then there was Alex, whose technical know-how was unparalleled, weaving in intricate details that many of us couldn't even fathom. Together, their collaboration created magic, something that neither could have achieved alone. The influence of society and social media cannot be overstated. While the world outside often indulged in binaries and stereotypes, our little ecosystem was a testament to the strength found in unity. Social media, at times a breeding ground for divisiveness, also acted as a bridge for us. I remember how one viral campaign, advocating for gender inclusivity, sparked a series of discussions in our weekly forums. Those debates didn't just stay confined within the walls of our rooms. They spilled over into our strategies, our creativity, and ultimately, our success. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Differences sometimes led to heated arguments. There were days when misunderstandings brewed, exacerbated by preconceived notions and societal norms. It was during these times that I realized the importance of empathy and open-mindedness. Listening became an art, a vital skill. Gradually, we learned to navigate through our differences, weaving them into our collective strength. I recall a pivotal project centered on designing a gender-neutral product. The brainstorming sessions were heated. Opinions clashed, egos were bruised, but there was a sense of purpose that kept us united. Sarah, who had faced gender biases in her previous job, passionately argued for inclusive design features. Liam, playing devil's advocate, challenged every idea to its core. Amidst the chaos, we found a balance, a synthesis of thoughts that finally led to a product that was not only innovative, but also celebrated the diversity of its users. As I reflect on those days, one thing stands out clearly. Embracing gender diversity and unity is not just a moral imperative, but a strategic advantage. Diverse perspectives and experiences enriched our work, our understanding, and our lives. In a world increasingly polarized by biases and misconceptions, our story serves as a beacon of hope, proof that strength is not found in similarity, but in the rich, varied tapestry of our differences. And so, as the final design was unveiled, as the product drew rave reviews, it wasn't just a victory for the company. It was a testament to the power of unity in diversity. A tangible reminder that when we come together, irrespective of our backgrounds and genders, we create something far greater than the sum of our parts. Chapter 14: Empowering Change and Advocacy. Taking action against gender inequality. I still remember the first time I realized that gender inequality was not some abstract concept confined to textbooks. It was a chilly autumn evening. My friend Jane and I were at a local bookstore cafe, catching up. Jane, who had always been brilliant, shared her latest ordeal at work. Despite having years of experience and an impeccable track record, she was still earning less than her male colleague who had significantly lesser experience. The unfairness screamed at us from the worn-out pages of her monthly pay stubs. Jane's story ignited something within me. I decided it wasn't enough to merely recognize these disparities. Action was needed. The very next day, I began researching practical steps and strategies, not just for her, but for everyone affected by this pervasive issue. I discovered that individual actions, when unified, could make a massive difference. One crucial step was fostering conversations about gender inequality in our immediate circles. It turns out, awareness is the first and foremost catalyst for change. We started small, organizing informal meetups and discussions in our community. Men and women sat together, sharing their experiences and perspectives. It was eye-opening. Stories poured out, not unlike Jane's, revealing layers of bias and discrimination that many were unaware of. These conversations, while sometimes difficult, became the building blocks for a supportive network committed to change. Parallel to these community engagements, I began leveraging social media as a tool for advocacy. It became clear that social platforms were not just for posting selfies and food pictures. They had the power to amplify voices and mobilize movements. I started a blog dedicated to addressing gender inequality, sharing stories, statistics, and actionable advice. It didn't take long for a small but growing audience to gather. People shared posts, engaged in discussions, and some even reported taking steps to advocate for equality in their workplaces. Social media wasn't just a platform for me. It became a weapon against complacency. It turned out that many others felt the same way we did, but lacked a space to channel their frustrations. Online campaigns, hashtags, and virtual meetups evolved from mere ideas into real movements, bringing together like-minded individuals who were not afraid to challenge the status quo. As the weeks passed, our community-driven initiatives began to gain traction. We collaborated with local businesses to conduct workshops on gender sensitivity. These workshops weren't just about preaching equality, but involved interactive sessions where employees, both male and female, could rethink their biases and learn inclusive practices. Furthermore, we started advocating for transparent salary disclosures, which pressured several companies to re-evaluate their compensation structures and work environments. Our movement was, however, met with resistance. Not everyone was ready to accept these changes, and some outright rejected the need for them. There were heated debates, both online and offline. Yet, we persisted. The resistance actually underscored the necessity of our work, showing us areas that required the most attention. Each argument we faced was a reminder of why we couldn't afford to back down. One evening, as I was scrolling through my social media feed, I came across a post from Jane. She had finally received a well-deserved promotion and a salary adjustment. The joy in her words was palpable. Her victory was a testament to our collective efforts, a small but significant step towards a more equitable world. But it was also a reminder of how much more work remained. As I sat back, feeling a mix of relief and resolve, I realized that the fight against gender inequality was far from over. Our small community had made ripples, but it was time to create waves. Strengthened by our successes and undeterred by the challenges, I knew we were on the right path. And as more people joined us, each bringing their stories and determination, our cause grew stronger. The journey ahead was long, but with every step, we were inching closer to a world where gender no longer dictated one's worth or opportunities. Supporting gender-equal policies and initiatives. As I sat in the packed town hall meeting, I couldn't help but feel a palpable sense of urgency and determination in the room. Each face around me, both men and women, reflected a shared goal: to bring genuine change to our society by supporting gender-equal policies and initiatives. It wasn't just about fairness, it was about recognizing the inherent worth and potential in everyone, regardless of their gender. My journey into advocacy for gender equality began with an innocuous social media post that I stumbled upon one lazy afternoon. It was a video clip of a young girl, eloquently speaking about the disparities she faced in her school and sports teams. Her bravery struck a chord deep within me. She wasn't just a voice in the wilderness, she was a beacon for what we, as a society, needed to confront and rectify. Inspired, I began to consume everything I could find on the topic. Statistics, personal stories, documentaries. Each piece of information I uncovered added layers to my understanding and fueled my drive. I joined online forums and quickly realized that social media was a double-edged sword. On one side, it amplified the voices of those crying out for change. On the other, it exposed the deep-seated biases and resistance still rampant in our world. The influence of society played a significant role in shaping our collective attitudes towards gender. The more I engaged, the clearer it became that these ingrained perspectives were not just damaging to women, but to men as well. We had all been placed in rigid boxes, told what we could or couldn't do based on ancient, arbitrary rules. Breaking free from this required more than awareness, it demanded actionable steps. I remember vividly the day I attended my first protest rally. It wasn't just a collection of angry chants and rebellious signs. It was a community, a mosaic of individuals united by a common cause. Men stood shoulder to shoulder with women, young and old, advocating for reforms in workplace policies, educational programs, and healthcare services. We were there to dismantle systemic barriers and carve a new path forward. Yet, as empowering as these moments were, they were also sobering. Change, as we all knew, wouldn't come easily. It required persistence, resilience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The battle for gender equality wasn't just about passing new laws. It was about changing hearts and minds, about fostering a culture where equity was the norm rather than the exception. My thoughts drifted back to the present as the spokesperson on stage made a compelling case for supporting a new initiative aimed at closing the gender pay gap. The data she presented was irrefutable, yet I could see the skeptical expressions on some faces in the crowd. It was a reminder of the resistance we still faced, the long road ahead. But in those moments of doubt, I drew strength from the solidarity around me, from the knowledge that we were part of a larger, unstoppable movement. As the meeting concluded, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Supporting gender-equal policies and initiatives wasn't just a duty, it was a moral imperative. For every girl with a dream, for every boy confined by outdated norms, we had to press on, and we would. The journey might be long and fraught with challenges, but with each step taken together, we moved closer to a society where everyone could thrive, equally and unreservedly.
Amplifying diverse voices in advocacy.
When I first dipped my toes into the pool of advocacy, I wasn't prepared for the strength and resistance that would come with it. It felt like I had been thrust into a labyrinth with a cacophony of voices, each crying out for recognition. Most disheartening were those from diverse gender backgrounds. Their voices were often drowned out, sidelined, or overlooked entirely, muffled under the weight of a society that had long decided whose opinions mattered. Take Maria, for instance. A brilliant trans woman advocating for healthcare rights, she battled not just a system but also societal prejudice. The media, quick to sensationalize but slow to empathize, painted her advocacy as a trans issue, rather than a call for basic human rights. Watching her navigate the dual challenges of her identity and her mission taught me how crucial it was to amplify diverse voices. Every speech she gave was an act of courage, but also a call to arms for those who needed to listen and to act. We began organizing town hall meetings and social media campaigns, aiming to transform Maria's isolated struggle into a larger, communal effort. Social media, often painted as the villain in promoting divisive rhetoric, became our battlefield. Every tweet, every post, every shared story was a small but significant amplification of her voice and those like hers. The digital world, with all its noise and chaos, held the power to reach hearts and minds. It could pierce through ignorance and plant seeds of empathy. Then there was Jaden, a non-binary activist fighting for educational reforms. Traditional advocacy methods left them feeling unheard. Their experiences showed how entrenched biases could be within the very systems claiming to support diversity. We turned to visual storytelling, sharing short, impactful videos on platforms like Instagram and TikTok where Jaden's voice could not only be heard but seen in all its authenticity. Schools, parents, students, everyone watched. Some with skepticism, many with newfound respect. Our efforts gradually painted a collage of diverse narratives, a mosaic that began influencing decision-makers. Policies shifted subtly, but significantly. The voices that once echoed in the margins were breaking into the mainstream. Older generations, often more resistant to change, couldn't ignore the groundswell of support from younger generations. Both men and women from every walk of life began to see advocacy as an essential thread in the fabric of social justice. But our journey was far from over. Mobilizing for a rally one cold evening, I felt the weight of the struggle and the promise of success in equal measure. The presence of hundreds, resonating with shared purpose, was electrifying. Yet, in that crowd, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about faces, stories, lives that demanded validation and action. As I looked around, I realized the movement was real, palpable. It had moved from hashtags to handshakes, from likes to legislation. In that moment, I knew the importance of our mission was not just about amplifying diverse voices, it was about creating spaces where those voices could thrive. Every story shared had the power to change the world, one mind at a time. With every step forward, the tension mounted because the stakes were high, but so was the potential for transformative change. Chapter 15. Conclusion. Embracing fluidity in masculine and feminine energies. Celebrating gender diversity. I remember the first time I truly understood the beauty of gender diversity. It was during a late summer evening when I was invited to a community celebration in the heart of the city. The streets were alive with colors, music, and a sense of unity that was almost palpable. People from different walks of life gathered, all sharing an unspoken understanding that we were all here to celebrate each other's authenticity. At the center of the festivities was a stage where individuals shared their stories. I listened as Jamie, a non-binary individual, spoke about their journey with such raw honesty that it brought tears to my eyes. They talked about the struggles and triumphs, the small victories of finding allies in unexpected places. As Jamie's story unfolded, I could see people in the crowd nodding and smiling, silently showing their support. It was a powerful reminder of the influence that society and social media can have when used for good. One of the most heartwarming moments of that evening was a dance performance by a group of young people who identified across the gender spectrum. Their fluid movements and seamless transitions mirrored the very essence of what they stood for, the freedom to be oneself without the constraints of societal norms. Social media played a crucial role in bringing these performers together, as it allowed them to connect, share their experiences, and organize this incredible show. The celebration didn't end on the streets that night. Over the following days, I noticed the ripple effects on social media. Pictures, videos, and stories from the event were shared widely, touching lives far beyond the city limits. Friends who couldn't attend were visibly moved by the posts and the heartfelt captions that accompanied them. This virtual amplification helped normalize the conversations around gender diversity, making it a part of everyday life. As I reflect on that experience, I realize that celebrating gender diversity isn't just about grand events or social media campaigns. It's in the daily choices we make, acknowledging and respecting people's pronouns, educating ourselves, and speaking up against discrimination. It's about creating inclusive spaces where everyone can feel safe to express their true selves. Everyday interactions hold the power to influence and inspire change. By embracing gender diversity, we enrich our lives and create a more compassionate society. Let's celebrate each person's unique journey, not just with grand gestures, but with consistent and genuine efforts to support one another. Continuing the dialogue on gender equality. The topic of gender equality has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a household where my mother, a passionate advocate for women's rights, would often gather us around the dinner table to discuss the latest issues affecting women globally. Yet, for the longest time, it felt like these conversations were largely confined to our family. As I grew older and moved into the larger realm of society and social media, I realized how essential it was to keep these dialogues open and active. Social media platforms have acted as both a boon and a bane in this context. On the one hand, they provide a space where issues related to gender equality can be discussed freely. On the other hand, they can also amplify voices that seek to undermine these conversations. I've noticed that while many are eager to engage in meaningful discussions, others shut down opposing views, escalating what could be constructive dialogue into online battles. The challenge is in navigating these waters productively, ensuring that the topic of gender equality doesn't get drowned in the noise. In my own life, I've made an effort to keep these conversations alive, often using my social media platforms to share articles, opinions, and stories that highlight the importance of gender equality. But beyond sharing information, I've also realized the power of asking questions. Open-ended queries about people's experiences and views can pave the way for more involved and thoughtful conversations. What does gender equality mean to you? Or how do you think we can bridge the gender gap in our community? are simple questions that can spark deep, engaging dialogues. Public spaces like community centers and universities have also become essential hubs for these conversations. Workshops, panel discussions, and even casual meetups centered around gender equality can make a significant impact. I've attended several such events where men and women from various backgrounds shared personal stories, illustrating how gender inequality manifests in different ways. Listening to these stories not only broadened my perspective, but also emphasized the universal need for continuous discussion on this topic. We cannot deny the influence of cultural and societal norms in shaping our views on gender roles. Often, these norms are so deeply embedded that they go unquestioned. I've found that beginning conversations within our own circles, families, friends, and workplaces, can be incredibly powerful. Addressing gender biases and norms head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it may be, is crucial. The ripple effect of these small conversations can lead to larger societal changes over time. At times, it feels like we're moving at a snail's pace, and there are moments when the progress seems almost imperceptible. However, I've learned to celebrate the small victories. When my best friend convinced his company to extend paternity leave, or when my colleague successfully campaigned to have more women speakers at a tech conference, these moments serve as reminders that every step forward counts. As we forge ahead, it is vital to remember that the journey towards gender equality is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires persistence, patience, and most importantly, the willingness to keep the conversation going. By creating safe spaces, both online and offline, where people feel heard and valued, we can continue to push the needle towards a more equitable society. And for every setback, there's an opportunity to learn and grow, ensuring that the dialogue on gender equality remains not just alive but thriving. Progress towards an inclusive future. When I first started to notice the changes, it was subtle. It began with small victories, like seeing more women in leadership positions in my workplace or overhearing conversations that celebrated gender diversity rather than dismissing it. Social media played a significant role in this transformation, amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Movements like #MeToo and #HeForShe gained momentum, pushing societal norms and expectations to evolve at a pace that previously felt unimaginable. In my personal life, the shift was palpable too. I remember my younger cousin, just 18, confidently expressing his non-binary identity at a family gathering. A few years ago, such a declaration would have been met with confusion or even disdain. This time, it was different. Our family, representing a microcosm of a much broader societal change, embraced him with open arms. Moments like these bolstered my belief that we were genuinely progressing toward an inclusive future. However, the journey has not been devoid of challenges. There were times when the strides felt too slow, and the resistance too strong. Social media, while a powerful tool for change, also served as a battleground for opposing views. The pushback was fierce at times, with trolls and skeptics mocking the progress and spreading misinformation. Yet, amidst this digital cacophony, authentic stories of transformation and empathy emerged, inspiring others to join the cause. As we move forward, I envision a world where gender is not a limiting factor, but a celebrated aspect of one's identity. A world where men and women, regardless of how they choose to define themselves, are respected and valued for their individuality. This vision is not a distant utopia, but a tangible reality that grows clearer with each step we take toward inclusivity. The tension lies in the uncertainty of the future. Can we maintain this momentum? Can we overcome the inevitable hurdles that lay ahead? The progress we have made so far gives me hope, but it also instills a sense of urgency. The strides toward gender inclusivity and equality have set us on a path that requires unwavering commitment and collective effort. As I ponder these questions, I realize that the future of gender inclusivity depends on all of us. It depends on our willingness to listen, to learn, and to adapt. The inclusive future we aspire to is not just a goal, but a continuous journey. And in this journey, every voice, every action, and every moment of empathy counts. Thank you for joining us on this journey through balancing the masculine and feminine, navigating gender roles and expectations by Mindful Literary. As we conclude this audiobook, we hope you have gained valuable insights into the complexities of gender dynamics and the ways in which they shape our lives. By exploring traditional roles, societal influences, and the evolving landscape of gender, we have aimed to foster a deeper understanding and appreciation for the diverse expressions of masculinity and femininity. Remember, balancing these energies is not about adhering to rigid stereotypes, but embracing the fluidity and uniqueness of your own identity. Whether in personal growth, relationships, or professional settings, integrating both masculine and feminine traits can lead to a more fulfilling and harmonious life. As you move forward, we encourage you to continue challenging gender norms, advocating for equality, and celebrating the richness of diversity. Together, we can create a more inclusive world where everyone is free to express their true selves. Thank you for listening to Balancing the Masculine and Feminine, Navigating Gender Roles and Expectations. We hope this audiobook has inspired you to embrace your journey with confidence, compassion, and a renewed sense of balance.